They called her worthless, a political pawn, an Omega destined to be discarded the moment a better option appeared. For 3 months, Laya had lived in the Alpha King's castle as his claimed mate, enduring his cold silence and the council's cruel whispers. Tonight, with her bag packed and the castle asleep, she was finally leaving. But when Marcus appeared in her doorway, his golden eyes blazing with an emotion she'd never seen before, everything she thought she knew shattered. This is the story of an Omega who almost ran, and the Alpha King who'd been standing outside her door every single night, listening to her cry. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. The grandfather clock in the west corridor struck midnight, its deep chime echoing through the stone hallways of the Shadowpeak Castle like a death knell. Laya's hands trembled as she folded the last of her simple dresses. The plain cotton ones she'd brought from her village, not the silk gowns the royal seamstresses had made for her. Those expensive garments hung untouched in the massive wardrobe, tags still attached, symbols of a life she'd never truly inhabited. 3 months. 90 days of sleeping alone in a bed built for 2. 90 nights of waiting for footsteps that never came. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the dull ache of the mate bond. That mystical connection between Alpha and Omega that was supposed to be beautiful, transcendent, life-affirming. Instead, it felt like a chain around her heart, constantly reminding her of everything she wasn't good enough to have. The bond hummed weakly, a barely there pulse that told her Marcus was somewhere in the castle, probably in his study, drowning himself in paperwork and scotch. Anything to avoid coming to their shared chambers. Anything to avoid her. "You're being pathetic," she whispered to herself, zipping the worn duffel bag with more force than necessary. "He doesn't want you. Accept it and move on." But the bond flared slightly at the sound of her voice, as if protesting her words. She ignored it. The bond was a biological response, nothing more. It didn't mean anything when the Alpha on the other end couldn't even look at her during the rare council meetings she was permitted to attend. Laya moved to the window, gazing out at the sprawling kingdom below. Even in darkness, Shadowpeak was magnificent, lights twinkling in the valley where the common wolves lived, the great forest stretching endlessly to the north, mountains rising like sentinels to the east. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like a gilded cage. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, brown eyes too large for her thin face, dark hair hanging limp past her shoulders, the claiming mark on her neck barely visible beneath the high collar of her sweater. She'd taken to covering it lately. What was the point of displaying a mark that meant nothing? The claiming ceremony played in her mind like a cruel film reel. 3 months ago, she had been working in her father's bakery in the small border village of Millbrook, covered in flour and completely content with her simple life. Then the royal decree had arrived. The Alpha King required an Omega mate to solidify his reign, and the council had chosen her. Not because she was special, not because she was beautiful or talented or remarkable in any way, but because she was convenient, an unmated Omega from a family too poor and powerless to refuse, too insignificant to cause political complications. "You'll be a queen," her mother had said, tears streaming down her face as she'd packed Laya's meager belongings. Our little girl, a queen. But Laya had never wanted to be a queen. She'd wanted to fall in love, to choose her mate, to build a life on her own terms. Instead, she'd been delivered to the castle like a piece of furniture, presented to Marcus during a ceremony attended by hundreds of nobles she'd never met, and claimed in front of them all. She could still remember the feeling of his teeth breaking her skin, the bond snapping into place like a rubber band pulled too tight. For one brilliant moment, she'd felt complete, whole, connected to something greater than herself. Then he'd released her, stepped back, and looked at her with those cold golden eyes as if she were a stranger, as if the bond meant absolutely nothing to him. "The ceremony is concluded," he'd announced to the gathered crowd, his voice devoid of emotion. "You may return to your duties." No kiss, no embrace, no private moment to connect with his new mate. He'd simply walked away, leaving her standing alone on the dais while hundreds of eyes judged her, found her lacking, and whispered about how quickly the king would tire of such an unremarkable Omega. They'd been right to whisper. Laya turned from the window and surveyed the chambers one last time. The massive four-poster bed with its untouched pillows, the fireplace that roared with heat but provided no warmth, the bookshelf she'd filled with novels from the library, desperate for any escape from her lonely reality. The writing desk where she'd penned countless letters to her family, each one more dishonest than the last. Everything is wonderful. The castle is beautiful. Marcus is very kind. Lies. All lies. But what else could she write? Your daughter is dying slowly in a loveless bond. The king can't stand the sight of me. I'm completely and utterly alone. A soft knock at the door made her jump, her heart leaping into her throat. But it was only Vera, her assigned lady's maid, the only person in the entire castle who treated her like a human being rather than an inconvenient obligation. My lady? Vera's voice was gentle as she slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. The older woman's eyes immediately fell on the packed bag, and her face crumpled with sorrow. Oh, Laya, you're really doing it. Don't try to stop me, Laya said, proud that her voice didn't shake. I've made up my mind. Vera crossed the room and took Laya's hands in her own weathered ones. At 53, she'd served the royal family for 30 years, and had seen 3 kings come and go. If anyone understood the brutality of palace politics, it was her. I would never try to stop you, sweet girl. I only wish... She trailed off, shaking her head. I wish things had been different. You deserve so much better than this. I'm an Omega from nowhere, Laya said flatly. I was never meant for better. I was just convenient. You're wrong about that. Vera's grip tightened. I've worked in this castle since before Marcus was born. I've watched him grow from a boy to a man to a king, and I've never, not once in 30 years, seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you during that ceremony. Laya's laugh was bitter. If that's true, he has a strange way of showing it. 3 months, Vera. 3 months of silence. 3 months of sleeping alone. 3 months of being ignored in my own home. I know, darling, I know. Vera pulled her into a hug, and Laya finally let herself break, tears streaming down her face as the older woman stroked her hair. The king is complicated, damaged, but that's not your burden to bear. You deserve someone who can love you the way you need to be loved. They stayed like that for a long moment, Laya drawing strength from the only maternal comfort she'd known since leaving home. When she finally pulled back, Vera produced a handkerchief and dabbed at her tears with gentle efficiency. The servant's entrance on the east side, Vera said quietly. The guard there, Thomas, owes me a favor. He'll let you pass without questions or records. There's a carriage waiting in the village. I arranged it this afternoon. It will take you to Millbrook by dawn. Laya's eyes widened. You knew? How? I'm old, not blind. Vera smiled sadly. I've seen that look in your eyes before. The look of someone who's stayed too long in a place that's killing them slowly. I won't let you suffer another day, if I can help it. Fresh tears welled up, but these were grateful ones. Thank you. For everything. You've been the only kindness in this place. Write to me when you're settled, Vera said firmly. Let me know you're safe and happy. Promise me. I promise. Vera helped her into her old wool cloak, the one from home, not the expensive furs the king had provided, and pressed a small pouch into her hands. Money. Enough to keep you comfortable for several months. Don't argue, she added when Laya opened her mouth to protest. Consider it back pay for all the nights you sat alone in this room, doing a job no one should have to do. Laya tucked the pouch into her bag with shaking hands. This was really happening. She was really leaving. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt lighter than she had in months. Free. The coast will be clear in 10 minutes, Vera said, checking the small clock on the mantel. Marcus is in the North Tower with his beta, reviewing border reports. He never comes back before 2 in the morning. You'll be long gone before he even realizes you're missing. The bond pulsed at the mention of Marcus's name, a weak flutter of awareness that she ruthlessly suppressed. It would hurt for a while, breaking a mate bond always did, but eventually it would fade to nothing. She'd heard stories of rejected mates who went on to live full, happy lives. She could be one of them. She had to be. Vera led her through the warren of corridors that made up the private royal wing, past tapestries depicting centuries of Shadowpeak history, past suits of armor that gleamed in the torchlight, past locked doors hiding secrets Laya would never know. They moved in silence, Vera's hand occasionally rising to signal a stop when distant footsteps echoed through the halls. The castle was massive, housing not just the royal family, but hundreds of staff, guards, advisors, and nobles who maintain permanent residences. Even at midnight, there were people moving about, servants finishing late shifts, guards making their rounds, nobles returning from late-night entertainments. But Vera knew the patterns, knew the blind spots, and navigated them with the expertise of someone who'd spent 3 decades learning the castle's secrets. They were halfway to the servants' entrance when voices erupted from around a corner, sharp and argumentative. Vera immediately pulled Laya into a small alcove, pressing them both against the cold stone wall as 3 figures strode past. Council members. Laya recognized them immediately: Lord Hrothgar, Lady Ashbourne, and Councillor Thorne, 3 of the 5 people who truly ran the kingdom while Marcus played at being king, or so they thought. "Absolutely unacceptable," Hrothgar was hissing, his jowls quivering with indignation. 3 months and still no progress on an heir? The boy needs to set her aside and choose a proper mate. A proper Omega from a proper family, Lady Ashbourne agreed, her voice dripping with disdain. Not some baker's daughter who doesn't even know which fork to use at dinner. The entire court is laughing at us. Laya's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. She'd heard the whispers, of course, had felt the contempt in every sidelong glance and polite smile, but hearing it spoken so plainly still cut deep. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Thorne said, his calculating voice making Laya's skin crawl. "Lady Seraphine arrives next week for the trade summit. She's perfect. Daughter of the Western Pack Alpha, educated, sophisticated, and her family controls half the shipping routes on the continent. Marcus would be a fool not to see the advantage. He's already a fool for claiming that mousy little thing in the first place," Hrothgar grunted. "But we can fix this. We just need to make it clear that she needs to leave. Perhaps a generous settlement, a nice little cottage somewhere far away." "The bond," Lady Ashbourne interrupted. "Even if she leaves, the bond remains unless he formally rejects her. And you know Marcus? Stubborn as his father. He takes his duties seriously, even when they're inconvenient." "Oh, then we make her reject him," Thorne said smoothly. "Make her life here so unbearable that she chooses to break the bond herself. No scandal, no political fallout, just a weak Omega who couldn't handle the pressure of royal life." The 3 of them laughed, ugly, conspiratorial sounds that made Laya feel physically ill. Beside her, Vera's face was pale with fury, but she held up a hand, silently commanding Laya to stay quiet until the council members disappeared around another corner. "Those vipers," Vera breathed once they were alone again. "Those absolute vipers. Did you hear them? They've been working against you from the start." Laya leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. Everything made horrible sense now. The cold reception from the court, the way servants pretended not to hear when she spoke, the invitations to events that arrived too late for her to attend, the subtle but constant reminders that she didn't belong. It hadn't been her imagination. It hadn't been paranoia. They'd been systematically isolating her, making her feel worthless and unwanted, all so she'd do exactly what she was doing right now: leave. "Don't let them win," Vera said urgently, gripping her shoulders. "Don't let those poisonous snakes drive you away from—" "They already won," Laya interrupted, her voice hollow. "They're right. I don't belong here. I never did. Marcus doesn't want me, the court despises me, and staying will only prolong the inevitable. Better to leave now with some dignity intact. But please, Vera, I need to go, before I lose my nerve." The older woman's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she nodded and continued leading Laya through the castle. They passed through the kitchen, dark and empty at this hour, and down a narrow service corridor that led to the east entrance. True to Vera's word, the guard on duty was Thomas, a kind-faced man in his 40s who took one look at Laya's packed bag and simply nodded. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to stop her, just opened the small wooden door that led to the outside world and stepped aside. "Safe travels, my lady," he said quietly. "You deserve happiness." "Thank you," Laya whispered, and then she was outside, breathing the cold night air of freedom. The path down from the castle wound through the royal gardens, past fountains that sparkled in the moonlight, and hedges trimmed into perfect geometric shapes. Laya walked quickly, half expecting someone to call out, to stop her, to drag her back. But the gardens were empty, the castle windows dark. No one was coming for her. No one even noticed she was leaving. She was halfway down the path when the bond suddenly flared to life with an intensity that made her stumble. It wasn't the weak, distant pulse she'd grown accustomed to. This was strong, urgent, almost painful in its brightness. Marcus was moving, and he was moving fast. Laya's heart began to race. He couldn't know. There was no way he could know. He never paid attention to her, never checked the bond, never. A figure appeared on the path ahead of her, stepping out from the shadows of a massive oak tree. Even in silhouette, she knew exactly who it was. The bond sang with recognition, with longing, with 100 emotions she'd spent 3 months trying to suppress. Marcus. The Alpha King stood before her in simple black clothing. No crown, no royal regalia, just a man in the moonlight. But there was nothing simple about him. At 6'4", with shoulders that seemed carved from stone, he commanded attention even without trying. His dark hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and those golden eyes, the eyes that haunted her dreams, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Going somewhere? His voice was rough, strained, nothing like the cold, formal tone he used during council meetings. Laya's grip tightened on her bag. She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed what she'd say if anyone tried to stop her. But now, faced with him, all her carefully planned words evaporated. "I'm leaving," she managed, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I think we both know this isn't working." Something flickered across his face. Pain? Anger? Before his expression hardened back into that impenetrable mask she'd come to hate. "The council sent you away." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "No one sent me anywhere. This is my choice." "Liar." The word was soft, but cut like a blade. "I know what they've been doing, how they've been treating you. The whispers, the exclusion, the systematic campaign to make you feel unwelcome." Laya laughed bitterly. "If you knew, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you—" She trailed off, realizing how pathetic she sounded. Why would he stop it? He didn't want her any more than they did. Marcus took a step forward, and she instinctively took one back. The bond flared at the movement, protesting the distance between them. His jaw clenched. "Don't run from me," he said quietly. "Please. We need to talk." "Talk?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "We haven't talked in 3 months, Marcus. You've made it abundantly clear that you have nothing to say to me, so I'm making this easy for you. I'm leaving. You can reject the bond formally, or just let it fade. I don't care which, but I'm done being invisible in my own home." She tried to move past him, but he shifted, blocking her path without actually touching her. The scent of him, pine and leather, and something uniquely alpha, washed over her, making the Omega part of her brain scream to submit, to stay, to give him another chance. She ignored it. "Get out of my way," she said, meeting his eyes with all the courage she could muster. "You don't get to pretend you care now. You don't get to—" "I stood outside your door every night." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "Every night for 3 months," Marcus continued, his voice raw with emotion she'd never heard before. "I stood in that corridor, listening to you cry yourself to sleep, and I did nothing. I'm a coward, Laya, the worst kind of coward, because I knew you were suffering, and I was too afraid to do anything about it." Laya's mind reeled. Every night? He'd been there every night while she'd sobbed into her pillow, believing herself completely alone? While she'd whispered her pain into the darkness, thinking no one could hear? "I don't understand," she whispered. "If you knew I was hurting, why didn't you—" "Because I'm an idiot," he interrupted, and there was self-loathing in every syllable. "Because I thought I was protecting you by keeping my distance. Because the last Omega who got close to me ended up—" He cut himself off abruptly, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter. None of my reasons matter. I hurt you. I failed you. And I will regret that for the rest of my life." The bond was screaming now, begging her to close the distance, to forgive him, to give him a chance to explain. But she'd spent 3 months building walls around her heart, and they didn't crumble easily. "You can't just say these things now and expect me to forget everything," Laya said, hating how her voice wavered. 3 months, Marcus. 3 months of silence and loneliness and feeling like I was worthless. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "Yes." His golden eyes were bright with unshed tears. I know exactly what it did to you because I felt every moment of your pain through the bond, every tear, every lonely night, every time you reached for me and I wasn't there. I felt it all, Laya, and I will carry that guilt until the day I die. Then why? The question tore out of her like a sob. If you felt it, if you knew, why did you stay away? Marcus looked away, his jaw working as he struggled with words. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was falling in love with you, and I didn't know how to handle it. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Laya's bag slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the ground with a soft thud. She must have misheard. She must be hallucinating from stress and exhaustion, because there was no way he'd just said, "I know you don't believe me," Marcus continued, turning back to face her with an expression so vulnerable it made her chest ache. "I know I've given you no reason to trust me, but it's the truth, Laya. From the moment I saw you at the claiming ceremony, this tiny Omega in a borrowed dress who looked absolutely terrified but lifted her chin and met my eyes like a queen, I was gone, completely and utterly gone. You claim me because the council chose me," Laya protested weakly. "Because you needed a mate and I was convenient. I claimed you because the moment our eyes met, my wolf recognized its mate," Marcus interrupted fiercely. "The council presented me with 5 potential Omegas, 5 daughters of powerful families who would have brought political advantage and wealth. I rejected them all. Then they showed me your file. 1 page, no political connections, no advantages whatsoever. And I knew. I knew you were mine before I even met you." Laya's legs felt weak. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately that it scared her, but believing meant risking more pain, more rejection, more lonely nights wondering what she'd done wrong. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, and she could hear the tears in her own voice. "If you felt that way, why did you stay away? Why did you let me think you couldn't stand me?" "Because I'm the Alpha King," Marcus said bitterly. "And Alpha Kings don't get happy endings. My father loved my mother with everything he had, and when she died, it destroyed him. He became a shell of himself, barely able to rule, consumed by grief. I watched him waste away for years before his heart finally gave out. I swore I'd never let myself become that vulnerable." He took a shuddering breath, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "Then you appeared, and suddenly all my carefully constructed walls were useless. You terrified me, Laya. This tiny Omega from a border village scared me more than any battle, any political threat, any enemy I've ever faced. Because I knew that if I let myself love you the way I wanted to, if I let myself have you completely, losing you would kill me. So you pushed me away," Laya said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "You thought keeping distance would protect you from being hurt." "Protect both of us," Marcus corrected. "I thought if I maintained the bond but kept emotional distance, we could both fulfill our duties without the risk of—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I was wrong. So wrong. I didn't protect either of us. I just caused the exact pain I was trying to avoid." Laya's mind was spinning. 3 months of suffering, and it had all been based on fear? On a misguided attempt at protection? She didn't know whether to laugh or scream or break down completely. "You let me cry myself to sleep every night because you were scared?" The anger in her voice surprised even her. "You let me think I was worthless, unwanted, not good enough, because you were too cowardly to take a risk?" "Yes." He didn't try to defend himself, didn't make excuses, just stood there and took her anger like he deserved it. "I failed you in every way that matters. And I understand if you can't forgive me. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But please, please, let me give you the truth first. Let me tell you everything before you go." The bond was pulling at her, urging her to listen, to stay, to give him a chance. Against her better judgment, Laya found herself nodding. "Fine, talk, but I'm not promising anything." Marcus's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. He gestured to a nearby bench, and after a moment's hesitation, Laya sat. He remained standing, as if too restless to sit, and began to pace as he spoke. "The night of the claiming ceremony, after I walked away from you, I went straight to my chambers and destroyed half the furniture," he began, "because the bond was screaming at me to go back, to hold you, to never let you go. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified of what you made me feel." He paused, golden eyes finding hers in the moonlight. I told myself I'd give you space, let you adjust to palace life, build up my defenses before I let myself get too close. But then I'd see you in the halls, looking so lost and alone, and I'd want to scoop you up and take you somewhere safe, somewhere I could protect you from all of this, the politics, the council, the cruel court. But you didn't, Laya said quietly. You left me to face it alone. I know. And every day I watched you grow smaller, quieter, more broken. The light in your eyes dimmed a little more each week. And I hated myself for it, but I still couldn't make myself bridge that gap, because I knew that once I started, I wouldn't be able to stop. I'd fall completely, irreversibly in love with you, and then I'd be vulnerable in a way I'd sworn never to be again. He stopped pacing and crouched in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. This close, she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in months. Then tonight, I felt you pack, he said softly. Through the bond, I felt your determination, your relief at the thought of leaving. And I realized that in trying to protect myself from the pain of losing you, I'd already lost you. My fear had created the exact outcome I was trying to avoid. Tears were streaming down Laya's face now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. You should have told me. Any of this. All of this. Instead of leaving me to wonder what I'd done wrong. You did nothing wrong, Marcus said fiercely, reaching up to cup her face with hands that trembled slightly. Nothing, Laya. You are perfect. Kind and brave and stronger than you know. The failure was entirely mine. The touch of his hand sent electricity through her, the bond singing with joy at the contact they'd both denied for so long. Part of her wanted to lean into it, to let herself believe, to accept the explanation he was offering. But the hurt of 3 months couldn't be erased in one conversation. I need time, she whispered. I need to think. Something like panic flashed in Marcus's eyes. Time. Yes, of course. Take all the time you need. Just don't leave. Please don't leave. Stay in the castle. We can have separate chambers if you want. I won't pressure you. I won't even speak to you unless you want me to. Just please don't go where I can't protect you. Protect me from what? Laya asked, confused. I'll be safe in Millbrook. It's my home. Marcus's expression darkened. You heard the council tonight. I know you did. Vera sent me a message the moment you left your chambers, and I've been tracking you ever since. They're planning to bring in Lady Seraphine to push you out so they can install an Omega who'll be easier to control. If you leave now, they'll spin it as abandonment. They'll paint you as the weak Omega who couldn't handle royal life, and they'll use it to pressure me into a new bond before this one is even cold. Laya's blood ran cold. She'd been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't considered the political ramifications. Of course, the council would use her departure against Marcus. Of course, they'd have a replacement ready and waiting. I won't let them, Marcus continued, his voice hard as steel. I won't let them use you or manipulate you or drive you away. You're my mate, Laya, my chosen Omega, and I will burn this entire kingdom to the ground before I let anyone take you from me. The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Instead, it ignited something warm and fierce in her chest. For the first time in 3 months, she felt claimed, wanted, protected. What are you proposing? She asked carefully. Stay, Marcus said simply. Give me a chance to prove that I can be the mate you deserve. Let me show you that what I feel for you is real. And if, after a fair chance, you still want to leave, I'll let you go. I'll reject the bond formally, give you enough money to live comfortably anywhere you choose, and face the political consequences alone. But please, Laya, give me a chance to make this right. The bond was screaming at her to say yes, to throw herself into his arms and forget the last 3 months had ever happened. But she'd learned the hard way that following her instincts without thought led to heartbreak. If I stay, she said slowly, things have to change. No more distance, no more silence. If you're scared, you tell me. If you're struggling, you tell me. No more leaving me to cry alone while you listen from the hallway like some kind of ghost. Agreed, Marcus said immediately. Complete honesty, no more hiding. And the council, Laya continued, her voice growing stronger. I won't let them push me around anymore. I won't be excluded from meetings or ignored at events. If I'm going to be your mate, your queen, then I'm going to act like it. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger, less burdened. "There she is," he murmured. "There's my fierce little Omega." "I'm not little," Laya protested, but there was no heat in it. "And I'm not finished. You're going to tell me about her. The Omega who got close to you before. The one you're so afraid of losing." The smile faded, replaced by a look of deep pain. Marcus sat back on his heels, his hands dropping from her face. That's a long story." "We have time," Laya said. "You asked me to stay, to give you a chance." "Well, this is part of it. No more secrets, Marcus. If we're going to do this, I need to know what I'm dealing with." He was quiet for a long moment, and Laya thought he might refuse. Then he stood, offering her his hand. "Come with me. There's something I need to show you." Laya looked at his extended hand, calloused from sword practice, scarred from old battles, trembling slightly with tension. Taking it would mean committing to stay, at least for tonight. It would mean opening herself up to more potential pain, but it would also mean answers, truth, a chance at something real. She placed her hand in his. Marcus's hand was warm around hers as he led her back toward the castle, but instead of taking the main entrance, he veered left toward the old wing, a section of the fortress that had been closed off for years. Laya had passed it dozens of times during her lonely wanderings, always finding the heavy oak doors locked, always wondering what secrets lay beyond. Tonight, those doors stood open. "Where are we going?" she asked as they climbed a narrow spiral staircase, torches flickering on the walls casting dancing shadows that made the ancient stone seem alive. "Somewhere I haven't been in 5 years," Marcus replied, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Somewhere I swore I'd never return to." The bond hummed between them, stronger now that they were touching, and Laya could feel echoes of his pain, his fear, his determination. It was overwhelming after months of feeling almost nothing, like suddenly being able to hear after living in silence. They emerged into a corridor lined with portraits, generations of Alpha Kings, and their mates staring down with varying degrees of severity and warmth. Marcus paused in front of one near the end, and even in the dim torchlight, Laya could see the resemblance. The man in the painting had Marcus's strong jaw, his broad shoulders, but his eyes were softer, kinder, and the woman beside him was radiant with joy. "My parents," Marcus said quietly. "King Aldrich and Queen Ilara. He ruled for 32 years. She lived for 28 of them." Laya studied the portrait more closely. Queen Ilara was beautiful, with dark curls and green eyes that sparkled with mischief even in paint. Her hand rested on the king's arm, and the way they looked at each other spoke of a love so deep it transcended the canvas. "What happened to her?" Laya asked, though part of her already knew. "You didn't speak about someone in the past tense with that much pain unless the ending was tragic." "Childbirth," Marcus said, the word barely a whisper. "She was carrying twins, my younger brothers. There were complications. The healers had to choose between saving her or saving the babies." His jaw clenched. "She made the choice for them, ordered them to save the children no matter what." Laya's heart clenched. "And the twins?" "Lived for 3 days, just long enough for my father to name them and say goodbye." Marcus's voice was hollow, empty of everything except old grief. "Adrian and Matthias, I was 12 years old, and in the span of a week, I lost my mother and 2 brothers I never got to know. And I watched my father, the strongest man I'd ever known, completely fall apart." He turned away from the portrait, continuing down the hallway. Laya followed, her hand still clasped in his, feeling the tremors that ran through him as he walked deeper into memories he'd clearly tried to bury. "He stopped ruling," Marcus continued. "Stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped doing anything except sitting in her chambers, holding her clothes, breathing in her scent until it faded away. The council took over everything. I was just a boy, but even I could see they were making decisions that benefited themselves rather than the kingdom, and I couldn't stop them because my father, the king, was too lost in grief to care." They reached a door at the end of the hallway, and Marcus stopped, his free hand pressed against the wood as if gathering courage. It took 4 years for his heart to give out, 4 years of watching him waste away, becoming a ghost in his own castle. The healer said it was natural causes, but I knew better. He died of a broken heart. He loved her so much that living without her became impossible. Marcus? Laya breathed, understanding dawning. That's why you pushed me away. You didn't want to risk becoming him. I was 16 when I became king, Marcus said, still not looking at her. 16 years old and absolutely certain that love was the most dangerous thing in the world, that opening your heart to someone gave them the power to destroy you. So I swore I would never let myself be that vulnerable. I would take a mate when duty required it, but I would keep my heart locked away where it couldn't be broken. He finally turned to face her, and the raw pain in his golden eyes made her breath catch. Then you walked into that claiming ceremony, and every single defense I'd spent 10 years building crumbled in an instant. I looked at you, and I knew that you had the power to break me in ways my father never recovered from. And it terrified me. Laya reached up with her free hand and cupped his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw, the way he leaned into her touch like a man starved for affection. So you kept your distance. You listened to me cry but never came in. You felt everything through the bond but convinced yourself it was for the best. I told myself you'd be safer if I kept you at arm's length, Marcus admitted. That the council couldn't use you against me if they didn't know how much you meant to me. That you'd be happier without the burden of my damaged heart. Every excuse I could think of to justify my cowardice. He pushed open the door, revealing a chamber that took Laya's breath away. It was beautiful, all dark wood and rich fabrics, with a massive window overlooking the kingdom below. But it was also clearly abandoned, dust covering every surface, the air stale and undisturbed. This was my mother's private sitting room, Marcus said, leading her inside. After she died, my father couldn't bear to change anything. He'd sit in her chair for hours, just existing in the space she'd loved. After he died, I locked it up. I couldn't stand to see it, to be reminded of what love had cost him. Laya moved to the window, looking out at the same view she'd had from her own chambers, but from a different angle. Why did you bring me here? Because you deserve the truth, Marcus said, coming to stand beside her. All of it, not just the pretty parts or the easy explanations. You deserve to know that the man asking you to stay is broken in ways that might never fully heal. That I'm carrying damage from watching love destroy the person I admired most. That I don't know if I can be the mate you need because I'm still learning how to stop being afraid. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability he was showing, cracked something open in Laya's chest. This wasn't the cold, distant alpha king she'd lived with for 3 months. This was a man who'd been hurt so badly as a child that he'd spent a decade building walls to protect himself, only to find that those same walls were suffocating him. I'm broken too, she said quietly. 3 months of believing I wasn't good enough, wasn't wanted, wasn't worthy of basic kindness broke something in me. I stopped believing I deserved love, started thinking maybe everyone was right. Maybe I was just a convenient Omega who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention I could get. Marcus flinched as if she'd struck him. That's not true. That was never true. But I didn't know that, Laya countered, turning to face him fully. You want honesty? Here's mine. I hate what you did to me. I hate that you let me suffer alone while you stood outside my door like some kind of martyr. I hate that you made decisions about what I needed without ever asking me. And I hate that part of me still wants to trust you even though you've given me every reason not to. I know, Marcus said roughly. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Laya. If I could go back and change everything, I would. But I can't. All I can do is promise that from this moment forward, things will be different. No more distance. No more silence. No more protecting you from my feelings while claiming it's for your own good. Words are easy, Laya said, and she hated how bitter she sounded but couldn't stop it. It's actions that matter, and right now your actions for the past 3 months speak louder than anything you're saying tonight. Then let me show you, Marcus pleaded, taking both her hands in his. Let me prove that I mean every word. Give me a chance to be the mate I should have been from the beginning. The bond was singing between them now, urging her to say yes, to forgive, to let herself believe in the possibility of happiness. But Laya had learned to be cautious with her heart. If I stay, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do, I need you to understand something, she said firmly. I'm not your mother. Whatever happened to her, whatever your father went through, that's not us. We're different people in a different time. And if you're going to spend our entire relationship waiting for me to die and break your heart, then we're doomed before we even start. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to be so direct. Then, slowly, a look of respect crossed his face. You're right. You're absolutely right. I've been so focused on the past that I haven't been present for the future we could have. Could have, Laya emphasized. Not will have. Not yet. You're asking me to trust you, Marcus, but trust is earned, and you've got a long way to go before you earn mine. I understand, he said, and the determination in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. What do you need from me? Tell me what I have to do, and I'll do it. Laya thought about it, really thought about what would make her feel safe enough to stay. First, I want to sleep in my own bed tonight, alone. I need space to process everything you've told me without the bond influencing my decisions. Marcus nodded, though she could see it cost him. Done. What else? Tomorrow, I want you to explain to the council that I'm not going anywhere, Laya continued. I want you to make it clear that I'm your chosen mate, and that anyone who disrespects me disrespects you. No more letting them whisper behind my back or exclude me from events. If I'm going to be queen, then I need to be treated like one. Absolutely, Marcus agreed immediately. I should have done that months ago. Anything else? Yes. Laya met his eyes steadily. I want you to show me the rest of this wing, all of it, every memory, every painful corner, every reason you've been avoiding me. If we're going to move forward, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Marcus hesitated, and for a moment she thought he might refuse. Then he squeezed her hands and nodded. Okay. But Laya, some of these rooms, they're not easy to see. They contain things I've kept locked away for good reason. I'm not asking for easy, Laya said. I'm asking for real. He led her out of Queen Alara's sitting room and down the hallway, stopping in front of another door. This one was smaller, simpler, with a child's drawing still tacked to the wood, a crayon sketch of a family holding hands. My old bedroom, Marcus said softly, from before I became king. Before everything changed. He opened the door, and Laya stepped into a time capsule. The room was frozen exactly as a 12-year-old boy had left it, training swords on the wall, books scattered on the desk, a bed with blue blankets rumpled as if someone had just climbed out. But what caught her attention were the drawings covering every available surface. Hundreds of them. Sketches of wolves and castles and families. Some were childishly simple, others showed real talent. And in every single one, there was a woman with dark curls and a bright smile. Queen Alara, drawn over and over again by a boy trying desperately to hold on to her memory. I drew her every day for 2 years after she died, Marcus said from the doorway. I was so afraid I'd forget what she looked like, how she smiled, the way she'd read to me before bed. So I drew her, again and again and again. Laya moved closer to one of the sketches, seeing the love and loss in every pencil stroke. You were just a child. You shouldn't have had to carry that kind of grief alone. I wasn't alone, Marcus said quietly. I had my father, for all the good it did either of us. We just sat in our separate corners, drowning in our own pain, too broken to help each other. He crossed to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a leather journal. After he died, I wrote him letters. Stupid, right? Writing to a dead man. But I didn't know what else to do with everything I was feeling. It's not stupid, Laya said gently. It's human. Marcus flipped through the pages, and Laya caught glimpses of teenage handwriting, angry scrawls, desperate questions, grief poured onto paper because there was nowhere else to put it. I blamed him for a long time, Marcus admitted, for choosing grief over his living son, for abandoning me when I needed him most, for teaching me that love was something to fear rather than celebrate. He closed the journal, setting it back in the drawer. I'm still angry with him, if I'm honest. Still hurt by his choice to give up rather than fight for me. Have you ever talked to anyone about this? Laya asked. A healer, a counselor, anyone? Marcus laughed bitterly. Alpha Kings don't see counselors. We're supposed to be strong, unshakable, above such human weaknesses. The council would see it as a sign of instability, a reason to question my fitness to rule. That's ridiculous, Laya said flatly. Everyone needs help sometimes, even kings. He looked at her with something like wonder. You're the first person who's ever said that to me. Everyone else just expects me to handle everything, to be perfect, to never show weakness. Well, I'm not everyone else, Laya said. And if we're going to do this, if I'm going to stay and try to make this work, then you need to understand that I don't want a perfect king. I want a real person. Someone who admits when they're struggling and asks for help when they need it. I don't know if I know how to be that person, Marcus admitted. I've spent so long being what everyone else needed me to be that I'm not sure who I actually am underneath it all. Then we'll figure it out together, Laya heard herself say, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Despite everything, despite the hurt and anger and betrayal, she wanted to help him, wanted to see who Marcus could become when he wasn't constantly carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The bond flared warmly at her words, and Marcus's expression shifted into something hopeful and terrified all at once. You mean that? You're really willing to stay? I'm willing to try, Laya corrected. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not staying out of duty or obligation or because the bond is pulling me toward you. I'm staying because I see something in you worth fighting for. But the moment you shut me out again, the moment you make decisions for me without my input, the moment you treat me like a burden rather than a partner, I'm gone. Permanently. I understand, Marcus said solemnly. And I swear to you, Laya, I will spend every day proving that your faith in me isn't misplaced. Good. Laya moved toward the door, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the night. Now take me back to my chambers. I meant what I said about sleeping alone tonight. I need time to process everything. Marcus nodded and led her back through the old wing, down the spiral staircase, and into the main part of the castle. The halls were still empty, the hour late enough that even the servants had retired. They walked in silence, the bond humming comfortably between them, different from before, warmer somehow, like a door that had been locked for too long finally creaking open. When they reached her chambers, Marcus paused at the threshold. Thank you, he said quietly, for listening, for giving me a chance I don't deserve, for being brave enough to demand better from me. Don't thank me yet, Laya said with a slight smile. Tomorrow's when the real work begins, when you have to face the council and make good on your promises. Something fierce and determined crossed Marcus's face. I'm looking forward to it, actually. They've had free rein to undermine you for too long. It's time they remembered who actually rules this kingdom. He reached out as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and let his hand drop. The restraint, the respect for her boundaries after she'd explicitly asked for space, meant more than any grand gesture could have. Good night, Laya, he said softly. Sleep well. Good night, Marcus. She watched him walk away down the corridor, his shoulders straighter than she'd ever seen them, as if some massive burden had been partially lifted. Only when he disappeared around the corner did she finally enter her chambers and close the door. Vera was waiting inside, perched anxiously on the edge of the settee. The older woman jumped up the moment Laya appeared, her eyes scanning for injuries or signs of distress. Oh, thank the stars, Vera breathed. When the king intercepted you, I thought... She broke off, taking in Laya's expression. What happened? Are you all right? Laya sank into the chair by the fireplace, suddenly feeling every ounce of exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster of the night. I don't know if I'm all right, but I'm staying. Vera's eyes widened. Staying? But I thought you were determined to leave. What changed? Everything, Laya said. And then, because Vera deserved to know, she told her everything. About Marcus standing outside her door every night. About his parents and his fear of love and the walls he'd built to protect himself. About the old wing and the journals and the promise to do better. When she finished, Vera was quiet for a long moment, her weathered face thoughtful. That boy, she finally said, shaking her head. That stubborn, damaged, foolish boy. I knew he was struggling, but I had no idea it ran that deep. You knew his parents? Laya asked. I was Queen Alar's lady's maid, Vera said softly. I was there when she gave birth to Marcus. I was there when she died giving birth to the twins. And I was there for every painful day afterward, watching King Aldrich and young Marcus destroy themselves with grief. She met Laya's eyes. I swore after that I'd never serve another royal family. Couldn't bear to watch that kind of pain again. But Marcus begged me to stay. Said he needed someone who remembered his mother, who could tell him stories about her when the memories started fading. Laya's heart ached at the image of a teenage Marcus, newly crowned and desperately alone, clinging to one of the last connections to his dead mother. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" "It wasn't my story to tell," Vera said simply. "And honestly, I hoped Marcus would tell you himself eventually. I didn't realize he was handling it so poorly." She paused, studying Laya carefully. "Are you sure about this, dear? Staying? Because that young man is going to need a lot of patience and understanding. He spent half his life convinced that love equals death. Unlearning that won't happen overnight." "I'm not sure about anything," Laya admitted, "but I know that leaving would be the easy choice. And I'm tired of taking the easy way out. For 3 months, I've been passive, letting things happen to me instead of fighting back. If I leave now, I'm just proving everyone right, that I'm too weak for this life." "You're not weak," Vera said firmly. "Don't ever let anyone make you believe that. It takes incredible strength to stay and fight when running would be so much simpler." "Then I'm staying," Laya said with more confidence. "And tomorrow, I'm going to start acting like the queen I'm supposed to be. Starting with that council meeting." Vera's eyes lit up with something like pride. "Now that's what I like to hear. What do you need from me?" "Help me prepare," Laya said. "I need to know everything about the council members, their weaknesses, their ambitions, what they care about. If I'm going to face them tomorrow, I need to be armed with information." Vera smiled, a sharp, satisfied expression that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment. "Oh, my dear girl, I've been collecting information on those vipers for 30 years. Let me tell you exactly who you're dealing with." They stayed up for hours, Vera sharing insights and stories about each council member. Lord Rothgar, whose gambling debts made him susceptible to bribes from wealthy merchants. Lady Ashbourne, whose perfect facade hid a daughter she'd disowned for choosing love over an advantageous marriage. Councillor Thorne, whose ambitions to see his own son on the throne made him the most dangerous of all. And the other two, Lord Cassian and Lady Morgrave, who typically followed wherever power seemed to be consolidating. By the time Vera finally left, promising to return at dawn to help Laya dress for the council meeting, the first hints of sunrise were painting the sky. Laya should have been exhausted, but her mind was racing with possibilities and plans. She moved to her writing desk and pulled out fresh parchment, beginning to draft what she wanted to say to the council. Not a speech exactly, but key points she needed to make. Ways to assert her authority without seeming aggressive. Methods of addressing their concerns while making it clear she wouldn't be pushed aside. The bond pulsed gently, and she realized Marcus was still awake too. She could feel him through the connection, restless, anxious, hopeful. Without really thinking about it, she sent a wave of reassurance through the bond, a wordless message that said, "I'm okay. We're okay." The response was immediate, a flood of gratitude and affection so strong it made her breath catch. Then it gentled, settling into a warm, steady presence that felt like being wrapped in invisible arms. It was different from before, when the bond had felt like a chain. Now it felt like a lifeline, connecting her to someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. Laya finished her notes and finally allowed herself to crawl into bed. For the first time in 3 months, she didn't cry herself to sleep. Instead, she lay in the darkness, feeling Marcus's presence through the bond, and let herself imagine a future where they were both whole, where love didn't mean death or abandonment, but partnership and strength. She was still afraid, still hurt, still uncertain about whether this fragile truce would last beyond tomorrow's confrontation with the council. But for the first time since arriving at Shadowpeak Castle, she felt something that had been missing for far too long: hope. The sunrise came too quickly, and with it came Vera, bearing tea and a determined expression. "Time to get ready, my lady. Today, we show them what you're made of." Laya let Vera dress her in a gown she'd never worn before, deep emerald green that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes, with silver embroidery that caught the light. It was formal enough for a council meeting, but not ostentatious. Strong, but not aggressive. Perfect. Vera arranged her hair in an elaborate updo that showcased the claiming mark on her neck. No more hiding it beneath high collars. If she was going to own her position as Marcus's mate, she needed to display it proudly. "You look like a queen," Vera said softly, stepping back to admire her work. "Now you just need to act like one." A knock at the door made them both turn. When Vera opened it, Marcus stood on the threshold, dressed in formal council attire. Black jacket, with the royal crest embroidered in gold thread, his dark hair swept back, his golden eyes intense and focused. "I came to escort you to the council chamber," he said, then seemed to really see her for the first time. His eyes widened, and the bond flared with something that felt like awe. "You look... Laya, you're stunning." She felt heat rise to her cheeks, but met his gaze steadily. "Thank you. Are you ready for this?" "Are you?" Marcus countered, offering his arm. Laya took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fine fabric. "I'm about to find out." They walked through the castle together, and Laya noticed immediately how different it felt. Servants who'd previously ignored her now bowed respectfully. Guards snapped to attention. Nobles who'd sneered behind their hands now offered careful smiles. Word had spread somehow. The castle knew something had changed between the king and his Omega. The council chamber was at the heart of the castle, a massive room with a round table that seated 12. 5 chairs were occupied by the council members, who all looked up in surprise as Marcus entered with Laya on his arm. "Your Majesty," Lord Hrothgar said, rising half out of his seat. "We weren't expecting you for another hour, and the Omega—" "Queen Laya," Marcus interrupted, his voice cold as winter frost. "You will address my mate by her proper title, Hrothgar, or you will address me about finding a replacement for your council seat." The room went deathly silent. Laya felt every eye turn to her, assessing, calculating, trying to determine how this changed the political landscape they'd so carefully cultivated. Marcus pulled out the chair to his right, the queen's seat, and waited for Laya to sit before taking his own throne at the head of the table. The message was clear. They were united, equal, a force to be reckoned with. "I've called this emergency session to address several concerns," Marcus continued, his tone brooking no argument. "First and foremost, the systematic campaign of disrespect and exclusion directed at my mate ends today, immediately. Anyone caught undermining her authority or spreading rumors about her will be removed from court permanently." Lady Ashbourne's face had gone pale. "Your Majesty, surely you're overreacting. We've simply been maintaining proper protocol. You've been bullying her," Marcus cut her off sharply. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. I know about the accidentally late invitations. I know about the whispered conversations that stop the moment she enters a room. I know about your plans to replace her with Lady Seraphine." Councillor Thorne shifted uncomfortably. "The Western Pack Alliance would be advantageous." "The Western Pack Alliance is irrelevant because I already have a mate," Marcus said flatly. "One I chose, one I claimed, one I intend to keep for the rest of my life. If you can't accept that, then you can tender your resignations today." Laya watched the council members exchange panicked glances. This was not the passive, distant king they'd grown accustomed to controlling. This was an alpha asserting his dominance, and they had no idea how to handle it. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "from this day forward, Queen Laya will attend all council meetings. She will have full access to kingdom finances, diplomatic correspondence, and military reports. Any decisions that affect the future of Shadowpeak will be made jointly between us. Is that understood?" "Your Majesty," Lord Cassian ventured carefully, "perhaps we should discuss—" "I'm not asking for discussion," Marcus said with lethal quiet. "I'm informing you of how things will be. You have 2 choices. Accept the new reality or find employment elsewhere. What will it be?" The silence stretched, thick with tension. Laya could feel the bond thrumming with Marcus's controlled fury, his determination to protect her, his absolute refusal to back down. Finally, Lady Morgrave spoke up, her voice carefully neutral. "The council accepts, Your Majesty. Queen Laya's authority will be respected." One by one, the others nodded their agreement, though Laya could see the resentment simmering beneath their compliant facades. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They'd simply learned they needed to be more subtle in their opposition. But for now, it was a victory. A small one, but significant. Marcus stood, offering Laya his hand. "Then this meeting is adjourned. The Queen and I have other matters to attend to." As they left the council chamber together, Laya could feel the weight of hostile stares boring into her back. She'd just made powerful enemies, people who would be looking for any opportunity to undermine her new position. The real battle was just beginning. The corridor outside the council chamber felt suffocating despite its vaulted ceilings and wide expanse. Laya's heart hammered against her ribs as she and Marcus walked in tense silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over her like a physical thing. She'd stood beside an Alpha King and watched him threaten the most powerful people in the kingdom on her behalf. The implications were staggering. "That was dangerous," she said quietly, once they were out of earshot of the guards. "You've just made them desperate. Desperate people do reckless things." Whoa. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't slow his pace. "They've been reckless for months. At least now they know there are consequences." "Do they?" Laya pulled her hand from his arm, forcing him to stop and face her. "Because from where I stood, it looked like you just backed them into a corner. And cornered animals bite." Something flickered in Marcus's golden eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she was challenging him. Then respect. "You're right. They will retaliate. Which is why we need to be prepared for whatever they try next." "We?" Laya repeated. "Marcus, I appreciate what you did in there, but I'm not a chess piece you can move around the board. If we're going to face them together, I need to know the full scope of what we're dealing with, not just the pretty version you think I can handle." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "The full scope is that the council has been embezzling kingdom funds for years, that they've arranged marriages, assassinations, and political coups across 3 neighboring territories to increase their own power. That my father knew and did nothing because he was too consumed with grief to care, and that I've been letting them operate unchecked because I was too afraid of becoming him, too broken by loss to rule effectively." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Laya studied his face, seeing the shame and anger warring beneath his controlled exterior. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because you asked for the truth," Marcus said simply. "Because I'm done hiding things from you. And because if we're going to survive what's coming, you need to understand exactly what kind of vipers we're dealing with." Before Laya could respond, rapid footsteps echoed down the corridor. Vera appeared around the corner, her normally composed face etched with panic. "Your Majesties," she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as she caught her breath. "There's been an incident. Lady Seraphine arrived early, 3 days early, and she's demanding an audience with the king. Now." Laya felt ice flood her veins. "The woman they want Marcus to replace me with is here already?" "It gets worse," Vera continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She brought her father, Alpha Draken of the Western Pack, and a full military escort. 50 wolves, fully armed, camping at our gates claiming it's for security purposes during the trade summit." Marcus's entire body went rigid. "Draken brought troops to Shadowpeak? That's an act of aggression disguised as diplomacy." "It's a threat," Laya said, her mind racing through the implications. "They're showing you what happens if you don't cooperate, accept Seraphine as your mate, or face military pressure from the Western Pack." "Exactly," Vera confirmed. "And half the court is already whispering that the king should accept, that allying with the Western Pack would be more advantageous than keeping an Omega with no political connections." The words stung, but Laya refused to let it show. She'd spent 3 months being dismissed and underestimated. Not anymore. "Where is Seraphine now?" Marcus demanded. "The grand receiving room," Vera said. "The council is with her. They're celebrating her arrival." Marcus's expression turned murderous. "Of course they are. They probably sent word to accelerate her visit the moment I claimed Laya." He turned to Laya, and the conflict in his eyes was painful to witness. "I need to deal with this. But you should stay here. Stay safe." "No," Laya interrupted firmly. "If you walk into that room without me, you're sending a message that I'm someone you hide away when things get difficult, that I'm weak, disposable. Is that the message you want to send?" Marcus looked torn. "Laya, Seraphine she's not like the council. She's dangerous in different ways, cunning, manipulative, and completely ruthless. I don't want her anywhere near you." "Too bad," Laya said, squaring her shoulders. "Because I'm not hiding anymore. We face this together, or we prove the council right that our bond isn't strong enough to withstand pressure." For a long moment, Marcus just stared at her. Then, slowly, a fierce pride spread across his face. "You're incredible. You know that?" "I'm terrified," Laya admitted, "but I'm also done being a victim." Marcus took her hand, threading their fingers together. The bond flared warm and strong between them, no longer the weak, distant connection of before. "Then let's show them what a united front looks like." They walked toward the grand receiving room together, Vera trailing slightly behind. With each step, Leia could feel the weight of what awaited them growing heavier. She'd never met Lady Seraphine, but she'd heard enough whispers to paint a picture. Beautiful, sophisticated, from a powerful family, everything an Alpha King's mate should be. Everything Leia wasn't. The double doors to the receiving room stood open, and Leia could hear laughter and conversation spilling out. When they entered, the room fell silent so abruptly it was almost comical. Lady Seraphine stood near the massive fireplace, surrounded by the council members like a queen holding court. She was exactly as Leia had imagined, tall and willowy with platinum blonde hair that cascaded down her back, porcelain skin, and ice blue eyes that assessed everything with calculating precision. Her dress was midnight blue silk that probably cost more than Leia's entire village earned in a year, and she wore it with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned her worth. Next to her stood a man who could only be her father, Alpha Draken, a mountain of muscle with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that held the cold calculation of a predator. He was flanked by 2 guards, both armed despite palace protocol forbidding weapons in the castle. "Ah, Marcus," Counselor Thorne said with false warmth, gesturing toward Seraphine. "Look who arrived to honor us with her presence. Lady Seraphine and Alpha Draken of the Western Pack." Seraphine's gaze swept over Marcus with barely concealed hunger, then landed on Leia with a dismissiveness that made her blood boil. "Your Majesty," she purred, her voice like honey laced with poison. "How wonderful to finally meet you, and this must be—" She paused, as if searching for a word that wouldn't be too insulting. "Your companion?" "My mate," Marcus corrected coldly, his hand tightening around Leia's. "Queen Laya of Shadowpeak, and you're addressing her with the respect her position demands, or you'll find yourself escorted back beyond our borders." Alpha Draken's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, boy. You're speaking to my daughter." "And you're speaking to the Alpha King of Shadowpeak," Marcus shot back without hesitation. "In my castle, where you arrived uninvited with a military force, which I'm choosing to interpret as either incredible stupidity or a deliberate provocation." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lord Rothgar stepped forward quickly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Your Majesty, surely there's no need for hostility. Alpha Draken simply wanted to ensure his daughter's safety during her travels. These are dangerous times." "These are dangerous times because wolves like Draken make them dangerous," Marcus interrupted. "Arriving with 50 armed soldiers isn't security, it's intimidation, and I don't respond well to intimidation." Seraphine laughed, a crystalline sound that grated on Laya's nerves. "Oh, Marcus, always so dramatic. We simply came to discuss the trade agreements. The military escort was Father's idea, not mine. You know how protective he can be." "I know how ambitious he is," Marcus countered, "and I know exactly why you're here 3 days early. The council sent word, didn't they? Told you to accelerate your visit because I'd made my commitment to my mate clear." Lady Ashbourne's face paled slightly, confirming the accusation. Seraphine's smile didn't falter, but something sharp and calculating entered her eyes. "Is that what she is?" Seraphine asked, her gaze sliding to Leia with renewed interest. "Your commitment? How quaint. Tell me, little Omega, what do you possibly offer the Alpha King that I don't? Political alliances, military strength, trade routes that could make Shadowpeak the wealthiest kingdom on the continent?" Leia felt every eye in the room turn to her, waiting to see if she'd crumble under the attack. The old Laya, the one who'd spent 3 months believing she was worthless, might have, but that version of herself had died the moment she'd packed her bags last night. "I offer him something you clearly can't comprehend," Leia said, her voice steady and clear. "A partnership based on trust rather than transaction. Love rather than political maneuvering. And the certainty that I'm here because he chose me, not because my father threatened him with an army." Seraphine's perfect composure cracked for just a moment, fury flashing across her beautiful features before she masked it with another tinkling laugh. "Love? How adorably naive. Spoken like someone who's never had to consider the weight of ruling a kingdom. Marcus needs a queen who understands power, not a village girl playing dress-up." "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You've insulted my mate in my own castle. I want you and your father's troops gone within the hour." "Marcus, Be reasonable, Counselor Thorne started. I am being reasonable, Marcus cut him off. If I were being unreasonable, I'd have them arrested for bringing unauthorized military forces into my territory. As it is, I'm giving them the courtesy of a peaceful departure. Alpha Draken stepped forward, and Laya could feel the raw power emanating from him. He was older than Marcus, more experienced, and his wolf was clearly stronger than most. You're making a mistake, boy. The Western Pack could be your greatest ally or your worst enemy. Choose wisely. I choose my mate, Marcus said without hesitation, every time, without question. So take your threats and your ambitious daughter and get out of my kingdom. The tension in the room was suffocating. Laya could see the council members exchanging panicked glances, clearly terrified of the political ramifications. Lord Cassian opened his mouth, probably to try another appeal, but was cut off by a commotion at the door. A guard burst in, his face ashen. Your Majesty, we have a situation. The Western Pack soldiers at the gate. They're not leaving. They're demanding entry to the castle, claiming they have orders to secure the premises for Lady Seraphine's safety. Marcus's expression turned lethal. They're attempting a hostile takeover disguised as a security measure. Don't be ridiculous, Seraphine said, but there was a smugness in her tone that made Laya's skin crawl. Father's men are simply being thorough. You can't be too careful these days, what with all the instability in the kingdom. It was a threat, a clear, undeniable threat that if Marcus didn't comply, the Western Pack would take Shadowpeak by force and claim they were restoring order to an unstable regime. You planned this, Laya said suddenly, the pieces clicking together in her mind. This whole thing, the early arrival, the military escort, the demands for entry. You're trying to force Marcus into a position where he either accepts you as his mate or faces a military coup. Seraphine's smile was all teeth. Clever little thing, aren't you? Though not clever enough, apparently. The Council has already agreed that an alliance with the Western Pack is in Shadowpeak's best interest. Your liaison with the King has been noted and will be ended with appropriate compensation. Marcus will reject your bond and claim me by sunset, or Father's troops will be forced to intervene for the good of the kingdom. Over my dead body, Marcus snarled, his alpha power flooding the room so intensely that several council members actually stumbled backward. That can be arranged, Alpha Draken said coldly. Dead kings are replaced, kingdoms continue. The question is whether you want to be remembered as the king who protected his realm or the fool who destroyed it for a nobody Omega. The bond between Laya and Marcus was screaming now, his rage and protective instinct so powerful she could barely breathe through it. She could feel him on the edge of shifting, of letting his wolf take over and tearing through everyone in the room. It would be a bloodbath. Marcus, she said quietly, placing her free hand on his chest. Through the bond, she sent a wave of calm, of trust, of absolute faith in him. Don't give them what they want. Don't let them make you the villain. His eyes, more gold than human now, locked on hers. They're threatening you, threatening us. I can't just... Yes, you can, Laya interrupted gently, because we're smarter than them, stronger than them, and we don't need violence to prove it. She turned to face the room, her heart pounding but her voice steady. The Council has overstepped its authority by negotiating with a foreign power without the King's consent. That's treason. Alpha Draken has brought military forces into Shadowpeak territory without permission and is now attempting to coerce the King through threats of violence. That's an act of war, and Lady Seraphine has conspired with both parties to undermine the legitimate queen and force an illegal bond rejection. That's just pathetic. Seraphine's face flushed with anger. You can't possibly think... I think you're all betting that Marcus won't call your bluff, Laya continued, her confidence growing with each word. That he'll cave to pressure rather than risk his kingdom. But here's what you're forgetting. Marcus isn't his father. He's not broken by grief or paralyzed by fear. He's an alpha king who's finally remembered how to fight for what's his. She looked at each council member in turn, seeing the uncertainty creeping into their expressions. So here's what's going to happen. Alpha Draken, your troops have exactly 30 minutes to clear our borders. Any soldier still on Shadowpeak territory after that will be considered an enemy combatant and treated accordingly. You can't, Draken started. I can, and I will, Laya interrupted. Because while you were busy threatening the king, you forgot something important. Shadowpeak has alliances too. The Northern Territories, the Eastern Clans, the Southern Pacts, all of whom have mutual defense treaties with this kingdom. Attack us, and you'll face a war on 4 fronts that will leave the Western Pack in ruins. It was a bluff. Laya had no idea if those treaties were still active or if the allies would actually honor them. But she delivered it with such conviction that she saw doubt flicker across Dracon's face. As for the council, Laya continued, turning to face them, your choice is simple. Renounce this treasonous alliance with the Western Pack and recommit to serving your king, or face charges of conspiracy and spend the rest of your lives in the dungeons. Choose now. Lord Hrothgar looked like he might be sick. Lady Ashbourne's hands were shaking. Even Councillor Thorne seemed rattled, his calculating expression finally showing cracks. This is insane, Seraphine hissed. You're a nobody, a baker's daughter playing at being queen. You have no authority. She has my authority, Marcus said, his voice like thunder. Every word she speaks carries the full weight of the crown. So when she tells you to leave, you leave. When she gives the council an ultimatum, they answer. And when she stands beside me as my mate and queen, you bow. The silence that followed was absolute. Laya could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the bond thrumming with Marcus's absolute conviction, could see the exact moment when Alpha Draken realized he'd miscalculated. You'll regret this, Dracon said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. The Western Pack doesn't forget insults. Neither does Shadowpeak, Marcus replied. Get out! Draken grabbed Seraphine's arm, probably harder than necessary based on her wince, and stalked toward the door. But before leaving, Seraphine turned back, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Laya with pure venom. Enjoy your victory while it lasts, little Omega, she said softly. But remember, Marcus's father chose love too. Look how well that ended for him. Then she was gone, sweeping out of the room with her father and their guards in tow. The remaining council members stood frozen, clearly terrified of being the next ones dismissed. Marcus turned to them, and there was no mercy in his expression. You have 1 minute to decide, loyalty or treason. Choose. Lord Cassian dropped to one knee first, followed quickly by Lady Morgrave. Forgive us, Your Majesty, we were misguided. Our loyalty is to the crown. Lord Hrothgar and Lady Ashbourne exchanged glances, then reluctantly followed suit. Only Councillor Thorne remained standing, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. This isn't over, Thorne said quietly. You've made powerful enemies today, Your Majesty. Both of you. Then they'll join the long list of people who've underestimated us, Laya said, surprising herself with how steady her voice remained. You're dismissed, Counselor. All of you. And if I hear of any more conspiracies, any more plots, any more attempts to undermine this kingdom, you'll find out exactly how ruthless a baker's daughter can be. They filed out in silence, Thorne's glare promising retribution even as he bowed his way out of the room. The moment the door closed behind them, Laya's legs gave out. Marcus caught her before she hit the floor, gathering her into his arms as the adrenaline that had kept her upright finally crashed. That was incredible, he breathed into her hair. You were incredible. Where did that come from? I have no idea, Laya admitted, her whole body shaking. I thought I was going to pass out. Did I really just threaten an alpha and the entire council? You really did, Marcus said, and she could hear the pride and amazement in his voice. You stood up to the Western Pack, called the council's treason, and bluffed your way through a political standoff that should have ended in bloodshed. Laya, you just saved this kingdom. We saved it, Laya corrected. Together. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. I love you, he said, the words tumbling out like he couldn't hold them back another second. I'm completely, irrevocably, terrifyingly in love with you. I have been since the moment I saw you, and I know I have no right to say it after everything I've put you through. But I need you to know. I need you to hear it. I love you, Laya. The bond exploded with emotion so powerful it drove the air from her lungs. Love and devotion and need and fear all tangled together in a knot so complex she couldn't separate the individual threads. Marcus, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. A deafening explosion rocked the castle. throwing them both to the ground. The windows shattered inward in a spray of glass, and somewhere in the distance, screams erupted. Marcus threw himself over Laya, shielding her from the debris as chunks of stone and wood rained down around them. When the shaking finally stopped, he lifted his head, his face covered in dust and small cuts. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her frantically checking for injuries. "I'm fine," Laya managed, though her ears were ringing. "What was that?" Marcus's expression turned grim as he pulled her to her feet and moved to the shattered window. What they saw made Laya's blood run cold. The western wall of the castle was on fire. Massive sections had been blown apart, leaving gaping holes through which she could see movement. Soldiers, dozens of them, pouring through the breach. "The Western Pack," Marcus said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "They're actually attacking." "But they left," Laya protested. "Draken agreed to withdraw." "It was a distraction," Marcus cut her off, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Keep us focused on the confrontation in the receiving room while his troops positioned explosives at the weak points in our defenses. We played right into their hands." Alarm bells began ringing throughout the castle, and Laya could hear guards shouting orders, the clash of steel, the terrified cries of servants and nobles scrambling for safety. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Marcus said, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the door. "The panic room in the royal chambers has reinforced walls." "No," Laya said, planting her feet. "I'm not hiding while your kingdom burns. If we're in this together, then we fight together." Marcus looked torn between pride and terror. "Laya, these are trained soldiers. This is a full military assault. You could die." "So could you," Laya countered. "And if you die protecting me while I'm locked in a room, I'll never forgive you." "We stand together, Marcus. That's what mates do." The bond flared between them, and Laya felt the exact moment Marcus accepted her decision. It terrified him. She could feel that clearly, but he also understood. Hiding her away would break something fundamental between them. "Then we need weapons," he said grimly, "and we need to rally our forces before the Western Pack takes the entire castle." They ran through corridors filled with smoke and chaos, Marcus cutting down any Western Pack soldier foolish enough to attack them while Laya stayed close to his back. She'd never seen him fight before, had never witnessed the deadly grace of an Alpha King in combat. It was terrifying and beautiful, and made something primal in her Omega nature respond with fierce pride. They reached the armory to find it already under siege. Captain Silas, Marcus's head of security, was barricaded inside with a dozen guards, fighting off Western Pack soldiers trying to secure the weapons. "Your Majesty," Silas shouted when he saw them, "thank the stars you're alive. The Western Wall is lost and they're pushing toward the throne room. We're outnumbered 3-1. "Where are our reinforcements?" Marcus demanded, grabbing a sword from the wall. "Cut off," Silas said grimly. "The explosions took out the eastern bridge. Our troops can't get back into the castle." Marcus's jaw clenched. "Then we make our stand here. Every soldier, every guard, every able-bodied wolf who can hold a weapon. We hold the castle until reinforcements can find another way in." "That could take hours," another guard protested. "Maybe longer. We'll be slaughtered." "Then we'll die defending our home," Marcus said fiercely. "I will not surrender Shadowpeak to Alpha Draken. Not now, not ever." Laya felt something shift inside her, a clarity that cut through the fear and chaos. She thought about Seraphine's parting words, about Marcus's father, destroyed by love, about the council's belief that she made him weak. They were all wrong. Love didn't make Marcus weak. It made him willing to fight, and she was done being the reason he had to. "There's another way," Laya said quietly, and every head in the room turned toward her. "A way to end this without thousands of deaths." Marcus's eyes widened with understanding and horror. "No, absolutely not. Don't even think about it." "Think about what?" Silas asked, confused. Laya met Marcus's gaze steadily, letting him see her resolve through the bond. Alpha Draken didn't attack to conquer Shadowpeak. He attacked to eliminate the obstacle preventing his daughter from becoming queen. If that obstacle removes itself, he has no reason to continue the assault. "You want to surrender to them?" Marcus's voice was strangled. "To let them take you?" "I want to challenge Seraphine," Laya said. "Omega to Omega, for the right to be your mate." The room erupted in protest, but Laya pushed forward. "It's within pack law. Any Omega can challenge for an Alpha's bond if both parties agree to it. Dracon wanted a political solution. This gives him one. If I win, the Western Pack withdraws and the assault ends. If I lose, she swallowed hard. If I lose, you get a mate who brings political advantages and I walk away alive. That's insane, Marcus said flatly. Seraphine has been trained in combat since childhood. She's stronger, faster, more experienced. She would destroy you. Maybe, Laya admitted. Or maybe I'm stronger than everyone thinks. But either way, it's the only option that doesn't end with this castle in ruins and hundreds of people dead. And I'd rather die fighting for you than live knowing I hid while others sacrificed themselves. The Bond was screaming with Marcus's anguish, his refusal, his desperate need to protect her. But underneath it all, she could feel something else, the terrible understanding that she was right, that this was the only way to stop the bloodshed. There has to be another way, he said, but there was defeat in his voice. There isn't, Laya said gently, reaching up to touch his face. And you know it! Outside, another explosion shook the castle. Time was running out. Marcus's hands were shaking as he gripped Laya's shoulders, his golden eyes wild with a fear she'd never seen in him before. I can't lose you, not now, not when I've just found you. You won't lose me, Laya said with more confidence than she felt. I'm stronger than I look. Stronger than anyone gives me credit for. Strength isn't enough against someone like Seraphine, Captain Silas interjected grimly. Lady Seraphine trained with the Western Pack's elite warriors. She's killed before, enemies of her father's territory. This isn't a sparring match, Your Majesty. It's a fight to submission or death. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Through the shattered windows, Laya could hear the sounds of battle growing closer, metal clashing against metal, war cries, the screams of the wounded. Every second they delayed meant more death, more destruction. Then teach me, Laya said, turning to Silas. Right now, whatever I need to know to survive the next 10 minutes. That's impossible, one of the guards protested. Combat training takes years. I don't have years, Laya cut him off. I have whatever time it takes Marcus to arrange the challenge. So either help me or get out of my way. Silas looked at Marcus, who seemed frozen in place, his jaw working as he fought some internal battle. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. Do it, Marcus said hoarsely. Give her whatever advantage you can. Silas moved with military efficiency, grabbing a training blade from the wall. Omega challenges follow different rules than Alpha combat. It's not about raw strength. You'll never match Seraphine there. It's about speed, cunning, and exploiting weaknesses. He demonstrated a basic defensive stance, and Laya mimicked it, her muscles already screaming in protest. She'd never held a weapon before, never trained for anything more dangerous than kneading bread dough. Seraphine will be overconfident, Silas continued, circling her and correcting her grip. She thinks you're weak, untrained, beneath her. Use that. Let her think she has the advantage, then strike when she's not expecting it. Where? Laya asked, forcing herself to focus despite the terror clawing at her chest. Where do I strike? The claiming mark, Marcus said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. His face was ashen, but determined. The Omega Challenge rules state that the fight ends when one Omega yields or when the bond is broken. If you can reach her claiming mark, wherever her previous Alpha marked her, and damage it severely enough, her wolf will submit automatically to protect the bond. She doesn't have a claiming mark, another guard pointed out. She's never been claimed. Exactly, Marcus said, his tactical mind finally overriding his emotional panic, which means her wolf is unconditioned to that kind of vulnerability. If Laya can get close enough to target where a mark would be, the junction of neck and shoulder, the psychological impact might be enough to make Seraphine hesitate. And in a fight like this, hesitation means death. Silas's eyes lit up with understanding. It's risky, incredibly risky. You'd have to get inside her guard, which means exposing yourself completely. But if you're fast enough, decisive enough. She could win, Marcus finished, though the words seemed to cause him physical pain. Another explosion rocked the castle, closer this time. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and somewhere nearby, a wall collapsed with a thunderous crash. We're out of time, Silas said, pressing the training blade into Laya's hands. Your Majesty, if you're going to do this, it has to be now. Marcus looked at Laya for a long moment, and through the bond she felt the war raging inside him, the desperate need to protect her versus the terrible knowledge that this was their only chance. Then he pulled her against him, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "If you die out there, I will burn the Western Pack to the ground," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "I will hunt down every last member of Draken's bloodline and make them pay for taking you from me. Do you understand?" "I understand," Laya whispered back. "But I'm not going to die. I'm going to win, and then we're going to rebuild this kingdom together. Trust me." "I do," Marcus said, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. "I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Laya. You just don't know it yet." He kissed her then, desperate and fierce and full of everything he couldn't say. The bond exploded with his love, his fear, his absolute faith in her, and Laya drew strength from it, letting it fill the hollow places fear had carved in her chest. When they finally broke apart, Marcus's expression had shifted into something cold and regal, the Alpha King preparing for war. "Captain, secure the armory and hold this position," he ordered. "Send runners to every loyal wolf in the castle. Tell them to fall back to the throne room. We make our stand there." "And the challenge?" Silas asked. "I'll arrange it," Marcus said grimly. "If Draken wants Seraphine on the throne badly enough to wage war, let's see if he's willing to risk her life for it." They moved through the castle in a tight formation, guards surrounding Marcus and Laya as they navigated corridors filled with smoke and debris. Bodies lay scattered along the way, both Western Pack soldiers and Shadowpeak defenders, grim reminders of what was at stake. When they reached the throne room, they found it already occupied. Alpha Draken stood at the center with Seraphine at his side, surrounded by at least 20 armed soldiers. The council members were there too, huddled against the far wall looking terrified. Councillor Thorn, however, stood near Draken with an expression of smug satisfaction. "So he was in on it," Laya murmured, and Marcus's jaw clenched. "Of course he was. He's been trying to put his son on the throne for years. What better way than to destabilize my reign and install a more pliable king?" Draken's eyes locked onto Marcus as they entered, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "Ah, there you are. I was beginning to think you'd fled through some secret passage. How disappointing would that have been?" "I don't flee," Marcus said coldly. "Shadowpeak is my kingdom, and I will die before I surrender it to an opportunistic tyrant like you." "Bold words from a king whose castle is burning," Drakon replied. "But unnecessary. I'm prepared to be merciful. Reject the Omega, claim my daughter, and I'll call off the assault. Your people live, your kingdom remains intact, and you get a proper queen who actually knows how to rule. Everyone wins." "Except Laya," Marcus said. "She's one insignificant Omega," Drakon said dismissively. "Her life or death is irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. This is about legacy, power, the future of two great kingdoms united. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment." "My judgment is perfectly clear," Marcus replied. "And it tells me you're a fool if you think I'd ever trade my true mate for your ambitious daughter." Seraphine's eyes flashed with rage. "Watch your tongue, Marcus. When I'm queen, I'll remember every insult." "You'll never be queen," Laya said, stepping forward despite Marcus's attempt to hold her back. Every eye in the room turned to her, and she felt her heart hammering against her ribs. But she kept her voice steady, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed. "I challenge you, Seraphine, Omega to Omega, for the right to be Marcus's mate." The throne room went silent. Seraphine's mouth fell open in shock. Then she threw her head back and laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed off the stone walls. "You? Challenge me?" Seraphine gasped between fits of laughter. "Oh, this is rich. The little baker's daughter wants to fight. Tell me, have you ever even held a weapon before today?" "Does it matter?" Laya asked. "Pack law is clear. Any Omega can challenge for an Alpha's bond, and you can't refuse without admitting you're afraid of a nobody like me." The laughter died instantly. Seraphine's expression turned venomous. "I'm not afraid of you." "Then accept," Laya pressed. "Or were all those speeches about being the superior Omega just empty words?" Draken's eyes narrowed as he studied Laya with new interest. "This is a trick. Some scheme to buy time for reinforcements." "This is Omega law," Marcus countered. "Older than any kingdom, more sacred than any treaty. If you refuse to honor it, every pack on the continent will know the Western Pack's word means nothing." Draken's jaw clenched, clearly trapped by his own cultural traditions. To refuse an Omega challenge would undermine his authority and make him look weak. But accepting meant risking Seraphine's life against an unknown variable. "Fine," he finally said, "we accept. But when my daughter kills your pathetic mate, you will honor the original agreement. Seraphine becomes queen, or the assault continues until there's nothing left of Shadowpeak but rubble." "Agreed," Marcus said, though the words seemed to tear something inside him. "But when Laya wins, your forces withdraw immediately, and you sign a non-aggression treaty that binds the Western Pact for the next 50 years. "When I win," Seraphine corrected with a vicious smile, "there won't be anything left of her to mourn." Laya's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to meet Seraphine's ice-blue eyes without flinching. "Then let's find out." The throne room was cleared of furniture, creating a crude arena in the center. Soldiers from both sides lined the walls, creating a circle of spectators. Laya could feel their eyes on her, some pitying, some excited at the prospect of bloodshed, some clearly placing bets on how quickly she'd fall. Marcus pulled her aside one last time, his hands framing her face. "You don't have to do this. We can still find another way." "There is no other way," Laya interrupted gently. "You know that. This is the only path that doesn't end with your kingdom destroyed and hundreds dead." "I don't care about the kingdom if I lose you," Marcus said fiercely. "Do you understand that? None of it matters without you." "Then I'd better win," Laya said, trying for a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Because I have plans for our future, and they don't include dying in the throne room." Marcus pulled her against him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that tasted like desperation and hope and goodbye. Through the bond, she felt him pour every ounce of his strength into her, his love wrapping around her like armor. "Fight dirty," he whispered against her lips. "Fight smart. And remember, you're not alone. I'm with you, always." Then he was stepping back, moving to the edge of the circle with Captain Silas, his face a mask of royal composure that didn't match the terror screaming through the bond. Seraphine entered the circle from the opposite side, and Laya's heart sank. Up close, without the pretense of diplomacy, Seraphine was terrifying. Tall and powerfully built despite her elegant appearance, she moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime training for combat. Her ice-blue eyes were cold and calculating as they assessed Laya, clearly finding her wanting. "Last chance to yield," Seraphine offered, rolling her shoulders as she loosened up. "I'll make it quick, relatively painless. It's more mercy than you deserve for wasting my time." "I'm not yielding," Laya said, gripping the training blade Silas had given her. It felt heavy and awkward in her untrained hands. "Your funeral," Seraphine said with a shrug. Then, to the watching crowd, "Let it be known that I offered mercy. Her death is on her own head." Counselor Thorne stepped forward, clearly appointed as the unofficial referee. "The challenge begins on my mark. It ends when one Omega yields, dies, or is rendered unable to continue. No outside interference under penalty of death. The winner claims the right to bond with Alpha King Marcus and all that entails." He paused, his eyes gleaming with malicious anticipation. "Begin." Seraphine moved like lightning, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Laya barely got her blade up in time to deflect the first strike, the impact sending shockwaves up her arms. The second strike came immediately after, then a third, each one driving her backward as Seraphine pressed the attack with brutal efficiency. "Is this really the best you can do?" Seraphine taunted, her breathing not even labored as she rained down blow after blow. "I've had better fights with training dummies." Laya's arms were screaming, her muscles unused to this kind of sustained effort. She could hear her own ragged breathing, feel sweat running down her back, taste blood where she'd bitten her lip. Through the bond, she felt Marcus's anguish, his barely restrained need to intervene. She was going to lose. They both knew it. Then Seraphine's blade slipped past her guard and sliced across her upper arm, drawing first blood. The pain was sharp and immediate. But something else happened too, something unexpected. The moment blood hit the floor, the bond between her and Marcus exploded with power, flooding her with strength that wasn't her own. It was like being plugged into a lightning storm. Marcus's alpha power poured through the mate bond, lending her his speed, his strength, his centuries of instinct honed through generations of warrior kings. Her vision sharpened, her muscles sang with newfound energy. And suddenly, she could see the patterns in Seraphine's attacks, the tiny tells that telegraphed each strike. Seraphine's eyes widened as Laya blocked the next attack with ease, then countered with a strike that actually forced the other Omega back a step. "What?" Seraphine started, but Laya was already moving. She remembered Silas's words, speed, cunning, and exploiting weaknesses. Seraphine was stronger and more skilled, but she was also overconfident, used to opponents who crumbled under her assault. Laya had spent 3 months being underestimated. She knew how to use it. She deliberately stumbled, making it look like exhaustion, and Seraphine took the bait. The Western Pack Omega lunged forward for what she clearly thought would be a finishing blow, leaving her right side exposed for just a fraction of a second. Laya dropped low and spun, her blade slicing across the back of Seraphine's knee, not deep enough to sever anything vital, but enough to compromise her mobility. Seraphine cried out in pain and surprise, staggering as her injured leg nearly gave out. "Lucky shot," Seraphine hissed, her perfect composure finally cracking. "Let's see you do it again." But now the dynamic had shifted. Seraphine was injured, angry, and no longer fighting with calculated precision. She was fighting with rage, and rage made people sloppy. They circled each other, both bleeding now, both breathing hard. Laya could feel her borrowed strength beginning to fade. The bond could only sustain that kind of power transfer for so long before it burned out. She had maybe another minute before she'd be back to her own limited abilities. One chance. She'd have one chance to end this. Seraphine charged, clearly planning to use her superior strength to overwhelm Laya before the smaller Omega could exploit any more weaknesses. Laya waited until the last possible second, then dropped to the ground and rolled, letting Seraphine's momentum carry her past. As the Western Pack Omega stumbled trying to stop, Laya surged upward, dropping her blade and wrapping her arms around Seraphine from behind. "What are you—" Seraphine started, trying to throw her off. But Laya wasn't trying to stab her, or choke her, or any of the conventional attacks Seraphine had been trained to counter. Instead, she sank her teeth into the junction of Seraphine's neck and shoulder, exactly where a claiming mark would be if the Omega had ever been bonded. It wasn't a true claiming bite. Laya had no alpha power to seal a bond, but the psychological impact was devastating. Seraphine's entire body went rigid, her Omega instincts screaming at the violation of having her most vulnerable spot targeted. And in that moment of frozen shock, Laya reached up and dug her fingers into the bite wound, making it deeper, more painful, impossible to ignore. Seraphine screamed, a sound of pure rage and humiliation and pain, and thrashed violently. She was stronger, and she managed to throw Laya off, sending her crashing to the stone floor hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. But when Seraphine spun around, her hand pressed to her bleeding neck, there was something new in her eyes. Fear. "You bit me," Seraphine said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "You actually bit me like a feral animal." "I did what I had to do," Laya gasped, forcing herself back to her feet, even though her entire body felt like one giant bruise. "This is an Omega challenge. There are no rules about fighting fair." Seraphine's face contorted with fury. "I'm going to tear you apart." She launched herself at Laya with a roar, abandoning all pretense of skill in favor of raw violence. But that was her mistake. In her rage, she'd forgotten everything she'd been taught about controlled combat. She was fighting like a brawler, not a warrior. And Laya had grown up with 4 older brothers who'd taught her exactly how to handle bullies who relied on size and anger. She sidestepped Seraphine's wild swing, grabbed the other Omega's extended arm, and used her own momentum to send her crashing face first into the stone floor. Before Seraphine could recover, Laya was on her back, one knee pressed between her shoulder blades, her hands locked around Seraphine's throat, not tight enough to truly choke her, but enough to make the threat clear. "Yield," Laya commanded, her voice hard. "This is over." "Never," Seraphine spat, still struggling despite her compromised position. "I don't lose to nobodies." "Then you're a fool," Laya said, pressing down harder. Through the bond, she could feel Marcus's desperate hope, his barely restrained urge to rush to her aid. "Because right now, this nobody has you beaten. Yield, and you walk away alive. Keep fighting, and I will finish this." For a long moment, Seraphine continued to struggle. Then, gradually, the fight went out of her. Her body went limp beneath Laya's weight, and through gritted teeth, she whispered the word that would end it all. "Yield." The throne room erupted in chaos. Shadowpeak soldiers cheered. Western pack wolves stood in stunned silence. And Marcus? Marcus was suddenly there, pulling Laya up and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You won, he breathed against her hair, his entire body shaking. You actually won. I can't believe you're incredible. You're alive, Laya finished, her own body trembling with adrenaline crash. I'm alive and we won, and please don't ever ask me to do that again. Never, Marcus promised. Never again. I swear it. Alpha Draken pushed through the crowd, his face thunderous as he surveyed his daughter still sprawled on the floor, bleeding from her neck and knee, utterly defeated. When he looked at Laya, there was grudging respect mixed with fury. The challenge is concluded, he said stiffly. The Omega Laya has won the right to remain bonded to Alpha King Marcus. The Western Pack acknowledges the result. And your forces? Marcus demanded, still holding Laya against him. Your agreement to withdraw? Draken's jaw clenched so hard Laya thought his teeth might crack. We'll honor our word. Western Pack soldiers will be beyond your borders by sunset. He turned to Seraphine, who was being helped to her feet by her guards, and his expression softened slightly. Come, daughter. We're leaving. But father, Seraphine started, tears of humiliation streaming down her face. Now, Draken commanded, we've lost. There's nothing more to gain here but further embarrassment. As they moved toward the exit, Seraphine paused and looked back at Laya. The hatred in her eyes was undiminished, but there was something else there too, a reluctant acknowledgement of the unexpected strength the little Omega had shown. This isn't over, Seraphine said quietly. One day, when you least expect it, leave, Marcus commanded, his alpha power flooding the room. Before I decide that your treachery warrants a more permanent solution. The Western Pack filed out, taking Counselor Thorn with them. The Traitor Council member shot one last venomous look at Laya before disappearing through the door, clearly planning to seek sanctuary with Dracon rather than face Marcus's justice. When they were finally gone, the remaining council members, Rothgar, Ashbourne, Cassian, and Morgrave, approached cautiously. They all dropped to their knees before Laya, their heads bowed. Your Majesty, Lord Cassian said, his voice thick with emotion, we wronged you. We allowed ourselves to be manipulated by Thorn and blinded by tradition. We see now that you are exactly the Queen Shadowpeak needs. Please, forgive us. Laya looked down at them, these powerful nobles who'd made her life hell for 3 months, now kneeling before her in genuine contrition. Part of her wanted to reject their apology, to make them suffer as they'd made her suffer. But she was tired of suffering, tired of revenge, tired of everything except the man holding her, and the future they could build together. Get up, she said quietly. All of you. If we're going to rebuild this kingdom, we do it as partners, not as enemies. But cross me again, cross us again, and there won't be a third chance. Understood? Understood, Your Majesty, they chorused, rising with visible relief. Captain Silas, Marcus called out, assess the damage to the western wall and get me a casualty report. I want to know exactly what this assault cost us. As Silas hurried off to obey, Marcus finally released Laya enough to look at her properly. His hand skimmed over her injuries, the cut on her arm, the bruises already forming on her ribs, the scrapes on her knees. You're hurt, he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. We need to get you to the healers. I'm fine, Laya interrupted, catching his hands. Bruised and bloody, but fine. Better than fine, actually. I just beat a trained warrior in single combat. I think I'm allowed to feel pretty good about that. A smile broke across Marcus's face, genuine and bright and completely transforming. You were magnificent, absolutely magnificent. The way you adapted, the way you used her overconfidence against her, Laya, you fought like a queen. I fought like someone who had everything to lose, Laya corrected. Like someone who'd found something worth fighting for and refused to let it go without a battle. The bond between them pulsed warm and strong, no longer the weak, strained thing it had been. It felt solid now, unbreakable, a connection forged not just in claiming, but in genuine partnership and shared struggle. I meant what I said, Marcus told her quietly, pulling her close again. I love you. Completely. Forever. Nothing will ever change that. Laya felt tears welling up, But these were different from the ones she'd cried during those lonely months. These were tears of joy, of relief, of finally, believing that she deserved happiness. "I love you too," she whispered, the word she'd been too afraid to say before. "I think I have since the claiming ceremony. I just couldn't let myself believe it was real." "It's real," Marcus assured her, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle and reverent. "More real than anything I've ever felt. You're my mate, my queen, my partner, and I promise you, I will spend every day for the rest of our lives proving that you made the right choice by staying." Around them, the castle staff and soldiers who'd witnessed the challenge burst into applause. Word had clearly spread through the castle because more people were flooding into the throne room, servants, nobles, guards, all of them cheering for their queen who'd saved the kingdom through courage rather than political maneuvering. Vera pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her weathered face as she pulled Laya into a fierce hug. "I told you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I told you that you were stronger than you knew, but even I didn't imagine this." "Neither did I," Laya admitted with a shaky laugh. "I thought I was going to die." "But you didn't," Vera said firmly. "You fought, and you won, and you proved every single person who doubted you wrong, including yourself." Captain Silas returned with his report, his expression grim, but not hopeless. 37 casualties, Your Majesty, 23 soldiers, 14 civilians. The Western Wall will take months to rebuild, and we lost the entire Eastern Armory to fire. But the damage could have been so much worse. If the assault had continued, "I know," Marcus said quietly. "Thank you, Silas. See that the families of the fallen are compensated and honored, and organize work crews to begin repairs immediately. We rebuild, starting today." As the orders went out and people scattered to begin the monumental task of restoration, Marcus guided Laya to the throne, not his solitary seat of power, but to sit beside him as an equal. "This is where you belong," he said softly, only for her to hear. "Not hidden away, not protected from the harsh realities of rule. Here, beside me, facing everything together." Laya looked out at the throne room, damaged but still standing, filled with people who just witnessed her fight for her place among them. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 months ago, terrified and certain she'd never belong. That girl was gone, transformed by pain and loneliness into someone stronger, braver, more certain of her own worth. "Together," she agreed, threading her fingers through his. "Always together." The bond between them sang with promise and hope, and the absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it as partners, as mates, as a king and queen who'd chosen each other not because of duty or politics or tradition, but because of something far more powerful: love. The first week after the Western Pack's retreat was a blur of reconstruction and revelation. Laya found herself at the center of a transformation she could never have imagined, not just of the castle, but of the entire kingdom's perception of what a queen could be. She stood now in what had once been Queen Alara's private sitting room, the space Marcus had shown her that first night when everything changed. But it looked different in daylight, with the dust covers removed and windows thrown open to let in fresh air. Vera directed a team of servants as they cleaned and restored the room, bringing it back to life after 5 years of abandonment. "The queen's chambers should reflect the queen who inhabits them," Marcus had said that morning, his arms wrapped around her as they'd watched the sunrise from their bedroom window. "My mother's rooms have been locked away long enough. It's time they served their purpose again." Now, as Laya ran her fingers over the dark wood desk where Queen Alara had once written correspondence, she felt the weight of legacy settling on her shoulders. Not a burden exactly, but a responsibility she was beginning to understand she could carry. "The last of the Western Pack soldiers crossed the border 2 hours ago," Captain Silas reported from the doorway. "Our scouts confirmed their retreat. Alpha Dracon is keeping his word. For now," Laya said, turning to face him. "But men like him don't forget humiliation. He'll be looking for another way to expand his power." Silas nodded approvingly. "You're learning quickly, Your Majesty. Most nobles take years to understand the nuances of territorial politics. You've grasped them in days." "I had good teachers," Laya replied, thinking of the late-night strategy sessions with Marcus, the history lessons from Vera, the tactical briefings from Silas himself, and strong motivation to learn. The captain's expression softened. The kingdom is lucky to have you. I know I didn't believe that at first. I thought the king had made an impulsive choice that would weaken us. I was wrong. It was the closest thing to an apology Laya had received from the gruff military man, and she appreciated the honesty. You were protecting your king. I can't fault you for that, but I hope you see now that I'm here to protect him too. In different ways, perhaps, but no less fiercely. I do see that, Silas confirmed, which is why I wanted to speak with you privately. It's about Counselor Thorn. Laya's stomach tightened. The traitor counselor had fled with the Western Pack, but his betrayal had left a power vacuum that needed addressing. Have your scouts found him? Better, Silas said with grim satisfaction. He tried to seek sanctuary with Alpha Draken, but apparently his usefulness ended the moment Lady Seraphine lost the challenge. Draken sent him back to our borders this morning with a note saying he has no use for failed conspirators. Where is he now? The dungeons, awaiting your judgment. Silas paused, studying her carefully. The king wanted to execute him immediately, but I suggested he wait. This is your victory, your majesty. You have the right to decide Thorn's fate. The old Laya would have deferred to Marcus, would have let him make the difficult decisions while she stayed safely in the background. But that version of herself had died in the Omega Challenge, replaced by someone who understood that power came with responsibility. Take me to him, she said. The dungeons beneath Shadowpeak Castle were as cold and unwelcoming as Laya had imagined. Stone walls weeping with moisture, the air thick with the smell of damp and despair. Thorn sat in the farthest cell, still wearing his once fine council robes now stained and torn. When he saw Laya approaching with Silas, he surged to his feet, gripping the iron bars. You, he spat, his cultured voice dripping with venom. This is your doing. You've poisoned the king's mind, turned him against his own people. His own people, Laya interrupted calmly, stopping just out of his reach. You mean the council members who conspired with a foreign power to overthrow their king? Those people? Thorn's face flushed with rage. I was trying to save this kingdom from the disaster of your influence. You're a nobody, a baker's daughter with no training, no connections, no right to rule. Marcus needed a proper queen, and I was doing what was necessary to give him one. By committing treason, Laya said. By helping Alpha Draken plan an attack that killed 37 of your own people. How exactly does that qualify as saving the kingdom? Casualties of progress, Thorn said dismissively. Sometimes sacrifice is necessary for the greater good. If you were truly fit to be queen, you'd understand that. Laya studied him for a long moment, seeing past the bluster to the desperate ambition beneath. You wanted your son on the throne. That's what this was really about. You thought if you could destabilize Marcus's reign, create enough chaos and doubt, the council would support a new king. Your king. Thorn's expression flickered, surprised that she'd figured it out, then defiant pride. My son would have been a better ruler. He's trained for it his entire life, unlike some common Omega who stumbled into power through blind luck. Blind luck, Laya repeated softly. Is that what you call defeating Lady Seraphine in single combat? Stopping a military assault through courage instead of running away? Standing beside the king instead of conspiring behind his back? She moved closer to the bars, close enough to see the fear Thorn was trying to hide beneath his arrogance. I'm going to tell you something, counselor. Something I wish someone had told me 3 months ago when I first arrived at this castle, terrified and alone. Your worth isn't determined by your bloodline or your connections or how long you've trained for power. It's determined by what you do when faced with impossible choices, by whether you choose courage or cowardice, love or ambition, the good of many or the advancement of few. Spare me your peasant philosophy, Thorn sneered. You know nothing about ruling. I know that a ruler who sees their own people as acceptable casualties isn't fit to lead anyone, Laya countered. I know that strength comes from unity, not from tearing down anyone who threatens your position. And I know that you're exactly the kind of poison this kingdom doesn't need. She turned to Silas. He's to be stripped of his title, his lands, and his wealth. Everything goes to compensate the families of those who died in the Western Pack assault. Then, he's to be exiled beyond our borders with nothing but the clothes on his back. If he ever sets foot in Shadowpeak territory again, he'll be executed on sight. You can't do this, Thorn shouted, rattling the bars. I have rights. I demand a trial before the full council. The full council answers to me now, Laya said calmly. And I've made my decision. Be grateful I'm showing more mercy than you showed those 37 people who died because of your ambition. She walked away from the cell, Thorn's furious shouts echoing behind her. But she didn't look back. That chapter was closed. When she emerged from the dungeons into the sunlight, Marcus was waiting, leaning against the castle wall with his arms crossed. The sight of him still made her heart skip, would probably always make her heart skip, but now there was no fear mixed with the attraction, just pure, uncomplicated love. So? He asked as she approached. What did you decide? Exile, Laya said. He loses everything, and if he comes back, he dies. Is that too harsh? Marcus pulled her against him, pressing a kiss to her forehead. It's merciful. I would have executed him the moment Silas brought him back. You're more forgiving than I am. I'm trying to build a kingdom on different principles than the ones that came before, Laya said, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. Fear and cruelty create loyalty that lasts only as long as the threat. I want something more lasting. You're going to make an incredible queen, Marcus murmured. You already are an incredible queen. Over the following weeks, Laya threw herself into learning everything she'd need to know to rule effectively. She sat in on council meetings, now down to 4 members since Thorn's exile, and asked questions that made the remaining counselors think in new ways. She walked through the damaged sections of the castle and spoke directly with the workers rebuilding it, learning their names and their families' stories. She opened the royal treasury records and discovered exactly how much the previous council had been skimming, then redirected those funds to improving infrastructure in the outer villages. The changes didn't come without resistance. Lady Ashbourne particularly bristled at the Queen's hands-on approach to governance, clearly uncomfortable with an Omega who asked direct questions and expected honest answers. But after Laya calmly dismantled her third excuse for delayed reforms in as many meetings, even Ashbourne began to show grudging respect. You remind me of Queen Alara, Vera said one evening, as she helped Laya prepare for a formal dinner with visiting dignitaries from the Northern Territories. Not in appearance, but in spirit. She had that same fire, that same determination to make things better, even when tradition said she should stay silent. Laya studied her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the confident woman staring back. She wore deep sapphire blue tonight, a gown that Marcus had commissioned specifically for her, elegant without being ostentatious, regal without being intimidating. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate style that showcased her claiming mark, no longer hidden but displayed with pride. Did she face a lot of resistance? Laya asked. Constantly, Vera replied, adjusting a strand of hair that had escaped. The council of her time thought an Omega Queen should be decorative and silent. Alara proved them wrong every single day until they had no choice but to acknowledge her brilliance. What happened to them? The council members who opposed her? Vera's smile was mysterious. Most of them eventually became her staunchest supporters. There's nothing quite like being proven wrong by someone's success to change your perspective. The few who refused to adapt, well, they found themselves on the wrong side of history. The dinner that night was Laya's first major test as a diplomatic presence. Representatives from the Northern Territories had come to renegotiate trade agreements and assess Shadowpeak's stability after the Western Pack assault. Laya knew they were watching her carefully, trying to determine if she was a legitimate queen or just a temporary distraction for the king. She sat beside Marcus at the head of the long banquet table, acutely aware of every eye upon her. The Northern Territory delegation was led by Alpha Cairn, a grizzled warrior in his 60s who'd been negotiating with Shadowpeak since before Marcus was born. I was surprised to receive the king's invitation so soon after your difficulties, Cairn said, his sharp eyes moving between Marcus and Laya. I'd heard rumors that the Western Pack had occupied your castle. Clearly, the rumors were exaggerated. Not exaggerated, Marcus replied smoothly. Just incomplete. Yes, Alpha Draken attempted a hostile takeover. And yes, he failed spectacularly, thanks in large part to my queen's courage and strategic thinking. Cairn's eyebrows rose. Is that so? I'd heard the conflict was resolved through an Omega challenge, but I assumed it was a formality, a political theater to save face. No theater, Laya said, meeting his gaze directly. Lady Seraphine and I fought for the right to be Marcus's mate. I won. The Western Pack withdrew, that's the truth of it. You fought Seraphine of the Western Pack, Karen repeated slowly, as if testing the words for believability. The same Seraphine who's won every territorial challenge she's ever entered. The one they call the Silver Wolf because of her speed and precision? The same, Laya confirmed, though I'd argue her reputation was built more on intimidation than actual skill. When forced to fight someone who refused to be intimidated, she folded rather quickly. A smile tugged at Karen's weathered face. I like you, young queen. You've got spine. That's rare these days, especially in Omega royalty. Most are content to look pretty and produce heirs. I have no interest in being most Omegas, Laya said. I'm interested in being the best queen Shadowpeak has ever had, and that requires a lot more than looking pretty. Indeed it does, Karen agreed. He raised his glass in a toast. To Queen Laya, who defeated the Silver Wolf and sent Alpha Dracon running, may your reign be long and your enemies short-lived. The table erupted in approving murmurs and the clink of glasses. Marcus's hand found Laya's beneath the table, squeezing gently in pride and support. The rest of the dinner passed smoothly, with Laya holding her own in discussions of trade routes, tariff structures, and agricultural exports. She'd done her research, studied the reports Vera had helped her find, and prepared thoughtful questions that impressed even the most skeptical Northern Territory advisors. When the delegation finally departed 3 days later, they left with renewed trade agreements that benefited both kingdoms and a promise to support Shadowpeak if the Western Pack attempted further aggression. You've just secured one of the most important alliances in the region, Marcus told her as they watched the Northern Territory carriages disappear down the mountain road. Karen doesn't give his respect easily, but you earned it. We earned it, Laya corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you teaching me, supporting me, believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Marcus turned to face her, his golden eyes intense with emotion. I need to show you something. I've been waiting for the right moment, and I think it's now. He led her through the castle to the old wing, the section she'd only visited once that first night when he'd shown her his mother's rooms and his childhood bedroom. But this time, he took her to a door she hadn't noticed before, one tucked away at the very end of the corridor. This was my mother's workshop, Marcus explained as he unlocked the door with an ornate key. She was a talented jeweler. Not many people knew that about her. She found it relaxing, creating beautiful things with her hands. The room beyond was smaller than the others, but filled with light from tall windows. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in tools and materials, delicate pliers, tiny hammers, spools of silver and gold wire, trays of gemstones in every color imaginable. After she died, my father locked this room up, Marcus continued, his voice soft with memory. He couldn't bear to see the unfinished projects, the plans she'd never complete. I only discovered it a few years ago when I was old enough to demand access to the entire castle. He moved to one of the workbenches and opened a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a ring, white gold with a single sapphire that seemed to capture all the colors of the ocean. She was making this when she died, Marcus said, lifting the ring with careful reverence. I found her design notes. It was supposed to be a gift for my father on their 30th anniversary. She never got to finish it. He turned to Laya, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes. I had the royal jeweler complete it according to her designs, but not for my father. For you. Laya's breath caught as Marcus dropped to one knee, holding the ring up between them. I know we're already mated, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I know the claiming ceremony already bound us together legally and magically, but that ceremony was arranged by the council, witnessed by strangers, and tainted by all the fear and distance I put between us. This is different. This is me choosing you, fully and completely, with no reservations or walls or terror holding me back. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Laya, you are the strongest person I've ever met. You took a kingdom that rejected you and won it over through sheer force of character. You faced down enemies that should have destroyed you and came out victorious. You saved me from a life of emotional isolation and showed me that love isn't something to fear, but something to celebrate. Tears were streaming down Laya's face now, her free hand pressed to her mouth. You are my mate, my queen, my partner in every sense that matters, Marcus continued. And I'm asking you, begging you, To accept this ring not as a political symbol, but as a promise. A promise that you will never again have to question your worth or your place in my life. A promise that I will spend every day proving that choosing to stay with me was the right decision. A promise that you are loved, cherished, and valued beyond measure. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. As if Queen Alara had somehow known, all those years ago, exactly who would wear it. "So what do you say?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Will you accept my promise?" "Yes," Laya breathed, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." They kissed there in Queen Alara's workshop, surrounded by tools of creation and beauty, and the bond between them sang with a completeness that took Laya's breath away. This wasn't the forced connection of a political claiming. This was something deeper, pure, forged through struggle and choice, and absolute commitment. "I love you," Marcus murmured against her lips. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anything. You terrify me and complete me in equal measure." "I love you too," Laya replied, holding him close. "Even when you're being an idiot about your feelings. Even when you're too stubborn for your own good. Especially then." He laughed, the sound filled with joy and relief and wonder. "Fair enough. I promise to try to be less of an idiot about my feelings in the future." "I'll believe it when I see it," Laya teased. Then more seriously, "But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not your mother and you're not your father. Our story doesn't have to end in tragedy." "I know," Marcus said, cupping her face in his hands. "You've taught me that. You've shown me that love can be a source of strength instead of a vulnerability waiting to destroy me. I'm still learning, still unlearning years of fear, but with you, I believe we can build something different, something better." "We already are," Laya said, touching the ring on her finger. "Every day we're proving that." The months that followed were a blur of progress and growth. The Western Wall was rebuilt stronger than before, with defensive improvements suggested by Captain Silas and approved by both Marcus and Laya. The council began operating with genuine transparency for the first time in decades, their meetings open to any citizen who wished to observe. Laya established a network of Omega advocates throughout the kingdom, ensuring that Omegas in every village had resources and protection. She also discovered a talent for diplomacy that surprised everyone, including herself. Her background as a commoner gave her insights into the lives of regular citizens that nobles often missed, and she used that knowledge to craft policies that actually helped the people they were meant to serve. The nobles who'd once sneered at her now sought her counsel. The servants who'd ignored her now greeted her with genuine warmth, and the kingdom that had rejected her as unworthy now celebrated her as exactly the queen they needed. 6 months after the Omega Challenge, Laya stood in the newly restored queen's chambers, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different everything is from that night I tried to leave," Laya admitted. "I was so certain I didn't belong here, so convinced that I'd always be the outsider, the Omega who wasn't good enough. And now? Now I know I was wrong," Laya said, turning in his arms to face him. "I didn't belong here because I was trying to fit into someone else's idea of what a queen should be. But once I stopped trying to be what everyone expected and started being myself, that's when everything changed." Marcus kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "You changed this kingdom. Changed me. I was so broken, so convinced that keeping people at a distance was the only way to protect myself. You taught me that walls don't keep you safe, they just keep you isolated." "We taught each other," Laya corrected. "You showed me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, that I'm worthy of love and respect and a place in this world. We saved each other, Marcus." A knock at the door interrupted them. Vera entered, carrying a bundle of correspondence. "Sorry to intrude, Your Majesties, but this just arrived from the Western Pack. It's marked urgent." Marcus tensed immediately, but Laya took the letter calmly. She broke the seal and read the contents, her expression remaining neutral throughout. "Well?" Marcus asked when she finished. "Alpha Draken is dead," Laya said, handing him the letter. "Killed in a territorial dispute with the Southern Packs. Lady Seraphine has assumed control of the Western Pack and she's requesting a meeting to discuss a formal peace treaty." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. She wants peace? After everything? Apparently losing to me taught her some humility, Laya said with a slight smile. Or maybe she just realized that trying to take Shadowpeak by force didn't work out so well for her father. Do you want to meet with her? Marcus asked, his protective instincts clearly warring with his trust in Laya's judgment. Laya thought about it for a moment. 6 months ago, the thought of facing Seraphine again would have terrified her. But she wasn't the same person she'd been 6 months ago. Yes, she said decisively. I think it's time the Western Pact learned that Shadowpeak is willing to be an ally to those who respect our sovereignty. And I think Seraphine needs to see that I'm not going anywhere. The meeting took place 3 weeks later in neutral territory, a small fortress on the border between Shadowpeak and the Western Pact lands. Laya arrived with Marcus, Captain Silas, and a full honor guard, making it clear this was a diplomatic mission of equals, not a supplicant seeking favor. Seraphine was waiting in the fortress's main hall, and the change in her was immediately apparent. Gone was the arrogant, cruel woman who'd mocked Laya in the throne room. In her place stood someone harder, more serious, with new scars and the weight of leadership evident in her posture. Queen Laya, Seraphine said, inclining her head in a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. King Marcus, thank you for agreeing to meet. Lady Seraphine, Laya replied, matching her formal tone. Or should I say Alpha Seraphine now? The title is still new, Seraphine admitted. Leading the Western Pact has been educational. My father ruled through fear and ambition. I'm trying something different. What did you want to discuss? Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. Seraphine gestured to the table where maps and documents were spread out. My father made many enemies during his reign. The southern pacts, the eastern clans, even some of our own vassal territories. His death has created a power vacuum, and everyone is circling like sharks. I need allies, and Shadowpeak is the strongest kingdom in the region. You want our military support, Laya said, studying the maps. I want a formal alliance, Seraphine corrected. Trade agreements, mutual defense pact, diplomatic cooperation. I'm offering favorable terms, access to our shipping routes, reduced tariffs on goods, intelligence sharing. In exchange for what? Marcus asked skeptically. Seraphine met his gaze steadily. In exchange for helping me transform the Western Pact into something better than what my father built. He ruled through violence and intimidation. I want to build something sustainable, something worthy of respect rather than fear. She turned to Laya. You did that. You took a kingdom that rejected you and won them over not through force, but through genuine leadership. I want to learn how to do the same. Laya studied the other Omega carefully, searching for deception or hidden agenda. But all she saw was sincerity and the exhaustion of someone carrying a burden they weren't quite prepared for. You're asking me to help you, Laya said slowly. I'm asking you to teach me, Seraphine corrected. I know I don't deserve your help. I know I was cruel and dismissive and tried to steal your mate. But I'm asking anyway because the Western Pact doesn't need another tyrant. It needs someone who actually knows how to lead. It was the closest thing to an apology Seraphine was probably capable of giving. Laya looked at Marcus, finding him watching her with complete trust in her judgment. If we do this, Laya said, it has to be a genuine partnership. No schemes, no hidden agendas, no attempts to undermine us. The moment I suspect you're playing games, the alliance ends. Permanently. Understood, Seraphine agreed immediately. And you have to acknowledge publicly that the Omega challenge was legitimate, that I beat you fairly and proved my worth as Marcus's mate. No more whispers about luck or tricks. Seraphine's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I can do that. I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. Then we have a deal, Laya said, extending her hand. Seraphine took it, and Laya felt the weight of what they were building. Not just an alliance between kingdoms, but a new path forward for Omegas who refused to be defined by others' expectations. The formal treaty was signed 3 days later in Shadowpeak's throne room, witnessed by representatives from every major pact and territory in the region. It was a historic moment, 2 former enemies choosing cooperation over conflict, 2 Omega leaders proving that strength came in many forms. As the celebration stretched into the night, Laya found herself on the castle balcony, watching fireworks explode over the kingdom in bursts of color and light. Marcus joined her, handing her a glass of wine and pulling her close against the cool evening air. "You did it," he said softly. "You turned an enemy into an ally, secured peace for the region, and proved once again that you're exactly the queen this kingdom needs." "We did it," Laya corrected automatically. "I couldn't have built any of this without you." "I disagree," Marcus said, kissing the top of her head. "You absolutely could have, but I'm grateful you chose to do it with me instead." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the fireworks paint the night sky. Then Laya said quietly, "I'm pregnant." Marcus went completely still. "What?" "I'm pregnant," Laya repeated, turning to face him. "About 6 weeks along, according to the healers. I wanted to be sure before I told you." The expression that crossed Marcus's face was complex, joy and terror and wonder, all tangled together. "A baby. We're having a baby." "Are you okay?" Laya asked, suddenly uncertain. She knew his history with pregnancy and loss, knew the memories this news would stir up. "I'm terrified," Marcus admitted. "I'm absolutely terrified, but also happier than I've ever been." "How is that possible?" "Because you're not your father," Laya said gently, echoing the words she'd told him before. "And I'm not your mother. Our story is our own, Marcus. We get to write it however we want." "A family," Marcus breathed, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to be a family." "We already are," Laya said, covering his hand with hers. "But yes, we're expanding. Are you ready for that?" Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that made her throat tight with emotion. "With you? I'm ready for anything. Every day you show me that the things I feared most, love, vulnerability, connection, are actually the things that make life worth living. So yes, I'm ready. Terrified, but ready." "Good," Laya said, resting her head against his chest. "Because this baby is going to have the most overprotective father in the history of overprotective fathers." Marcus laughed, the sound filled with genuine joy. "Probably true, but they'll also have the strongest, bravest, most incredible mother who ever lived. I think that balances things out." 10 months later, Laya stood in the newly renovated royal nursery, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. Princess Alara, named for the grandmother she'd never meet, slept peacefully in her mother's arms, perfect and whole and absolutely loved. Marcus sat in the chair beside them, his expression one of awestruck wonder as he watched his daughter sleep. "She's so small," he whispered, afraid to disturb her. "She's perfect," Laya corrected, gently placing the baby in his arms. Marcus took her carefully, cradling her against his chest like she was made of the most precious glass. "Hello, little one," he murmured, and Laya's heart melted at the absolute adoration in his voice. "I'm your father, and I promise you, with everything I am, that I will spend every day making sure you know how loved you are, that you never have to question your worth or your place in this world, that you grow up knowing you can be anything you want to be, a warrior, a scholar, a diplomat, or simply yourself." The baby stirred in his arms, her tiny hand reaching up to grasp his finger with surprising strength. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "She's got your determination already," he said with a watery laugh. "Hold on tight and never let go." "Just like her mother," Laya agreed, settling beside them in the chair. It was barely big enough for two, but they made it work, curled together around their daughter. Through the nursery window they could see the kingdom spreading out below, rebuilt, thriving, at peace. It had been a year and a half since that night Laya had tried to leave, convinced she had no place here. Now she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked softly. "That I almost missed all of this," Laya admitted. "If you hadn't stopped me that night in the garden, if I'd actually left, I would have spent the rest of my life running from the best thing that ever happened to me." "But you didn't run," Marcus said. "You stayed. You fought. You became exactly who you were meant to be." "We both did," Laya said. "You stopped letting fear control your decisions. I stopped believing I wasn't good enough. Together we became better versions of ourselves." Princess Alara made a small sound and both parents immediately focused on her, checking if she needed anything. She settled back into sleep, content in the circle of their arms. "I want her to grow up knowing our story," Laya said quietly. "Not just the pretty parts, but all of it. The struggles, the mistakes, the times we almost gave up, because the happy ending means so much more when you know how hard we fought for it. Agreed, Marcus said, and I want her to know that she comes from a line of strong Omegas, that her grandmother was brilliant and brave, that her mother faced down armies and changed a kingdom, that being an Omega doesn't mean being weak or less than anyone else. We'll teach her together, Laya said, resting her head on his shoulder, just like we do everything. Years later, when Princess Ilara was old enough to understand, they would tell her the story. About the Omega who came to the castle as a political convenience and became a queen through sheer force of will. About the king who learned that love was strength, not weakness. About the night that could have ended in goodbye but instead marked the beginning of something extraordinary. They would tell her about the Omega Challenge, the Western Pack Assault, the alliance that changed the political landscape of the entire region. About her namesake grandmother and the legacy of strong women she was born into. But most importantly, they would tell her about choices. About the moment Laya chose to stay instead of run. The moment Marcus chose vulnerability instead of isolation. The countless small moments when they chose each other, again and again, building a love that transformed a kingdom. For now, though, they sat together in the nursery as the sun set, bathing everything in golden light. A family. Imperfect, battle-scarred, but absolutely whole. Laya looked at the ring on her finger, Queen Ilara's sapphire catching the dying light, and thought about the scared girl from Millbrook who'd arrived at this castle convinced she'd never belong. That girl was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, more certain of her place in the world. She'd found her home. Not in the castle or the kingdom, but in the man beside her and the family they were building together. "I love you," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to Marcus, to their daughter, or to both. "We love you too," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Always and forever." Through the open window they could hear the sounds of the kingdom settling into evening, market vendors closing their stalls, children being called home for dinner, the castle staff preparing for the night shift. Life continuing, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. And in the royal nursery, surrounded by the life they'd built together, the king and queen of Shadowpeak held their daughter and each other, knowing they'd found something more valuable than any crown or title. They'd found home. The Omega who refused to kneel had risen to stand beside her king, and together they'd built a kingdom where love was strength, where courage was rewarded, and where the most unlikely heroes could change the world. Their story would be told for generations, not as a fairy tale of instant happiness, but as a testament to the power of choosing to fight for love, even when everything seems impossible. As proof that the greatest victories come not from never falling, but from having the courage to stand back up and keep moving forward. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Laya closed her eyes and let herself feel completely, perfectly content. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The end.